Hello, everyone. Here, let me make myself a little bit bigger here. So, sorry for the delay. There's been a little bit of drama about this year-old video, as a matter of fact. I don't know why exactly it's been drudged up now, of all times, but long story short, everybody's aware, of course. We have an unprecedented number of people in the chat, which is, maybe not that exciting for a channel this size, but... Wait, what am I saying? No, it is exciting for a channel this size. We're going for like a sober analysis of this thing, unlike the the kind of slapdash, hyperbolic response that Vosh did. So naturally, I have an entire bottle of wine at my desk. I am joined today by a very, very interesting interlocutor, Antonio something. He's AW on Discord, but I've had the pleasure of chatting with him a couple of times already. He has some extraordinarily well put together videos explaining Hegel, which the video we're going to be looking at unfortunately does not. And no offense to Luna. I actually quite like Luna as a person. It's a little bit disappointing that this is so badly done. That in itself is interesting, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I'm going to pull in Antonio. And in the description, once the stream is finished, we'll put a link to his videos explaining Hegelian thinking, for lack of a better term. I'm a total neophyte when it comes to Hegel. I know a little bit. I know enough to know that this thing by Luna is very, very off point. But Antonio will make sure that we don't drift into complete nonsense. So let me just pull him in. Antonio, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing good, thank you.
Awesome. So we've actually looked at this video before already on our server. We went through it fairly carefully for a fairly extensive amount of time. I'd say about an hour and a half to the midway mark, and then an hour and a half again afterwards. We hopefully won't repeat that. What was your initial impression of this?
My initial impression is that it's a rather orthodox presentation of dialectical materialism. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you'll find in, say, Trotsky's ABCs of Materialist Dialectics, the kind of stuff you find in Lenin's Imperial Criticism, the kind of stuff you find in Stalin's, literally, Dialectical Materialism, Mao's On Contradiction. Very orthodox positions, really.
Orthodox positions for them, that's kind of interesting, because as we were going through this before, you and I both noted that there were severe contradictions between her usage of terms like dialectical materialism, her equivocation of that with empiricism, and all that sort of stuff, and the way in which these terms are used in Marx. So that in itself is fairly interesting. Is there as somebody who has not delved deeply into this material at all, is there a major turn towards shifting the meanings of these terms to that in these writers, or is this something that comes after?
It's kind of implicit. Marx, since he doesn't really deal with these issues and is not really interested in these issues, which are what you would call metaphysical, really. Marx is far more interested in the social aspect of materialism, and his materialism is really a social materialism rather than a metaphysical materialism that cares about this general concept called matter. And the real interest comes much later with Engels in his publication of the Dialectics of Nature and Anti-Düring. And it's mostly those works which are the basis for then the notion of dialectical materialism in Lenin, in Mao, and certainly in Ho Chi Minh, so far as he had a conception as well.
Interesting. Okay. So we're going to be joined by our friend Brooks in a few minutes, but we'll just start going through this now. And if you want to stop it at any point, let me know. I'll stop it occasionally, and I'll ask you questions if I need clarification. We've already gone through it once, so I have a fair idea of where we're going to be having the greatest difficulties. But this will be precipitating a more in-depth look at the issues that have sort of emerged surrounding this video in particular and responses to it, of course specifically relating to Vosh's critiques, and of course the back and forth exchange that's been taking place between him and Luna, his husband, non-compete. So without further ado, I suppose we'll just get into it. People in the chat, please let me know if this is too quiet for you. Because this channel, of course, has a long and decorated history of not being audible. So, fingers crossed. But let me know in the chat, and I will be checking that regularly. So yeah, let's jump right into it.
Hi everybody,
Hi,
I'm
Luna.
Luna. Welcome back to Luna ơi. The world is a very scary place right now, and a lot of you are thinking about standing up for radical change. I get comments and messages from my audience every day who watch my videos because they want to learn
just
more
a quick
about my
question.
country,
Are you
Vietnam.
playing this
Absolutely.
somewhere?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I need to share this, don't I? Hang on one moment. I'm so used to using StreamYard for this sort of thing. All right, here you are. Okay. Can you see
Okay,
it?
yeah, there you go.
Okay, brilliant. Let me know if you can hear it.
Our history and how we were able to defeat the brutal oppression of colonial France and imperialist United States of America. Because right now, a lot of you are suffering from brutal oppression all around the world. Well, I believe that the key to our success is the key to any successful revolution is ideology. Ho Chi Minh once said, "Action without ideology is blind action. Ideology without action is dogmatism." If we want a movement, a revolution to succeed, action and ideology must go along together. Ideology will guide actions, and actions will make ideology come true. Actually, there's one more important part to this, which American has talked about in some videos before: investigation. So, if you're trying to think about how to change the world for the better, it's not a bad idea to investigate successful revolutions of the past, like the revolution we had here in Vietnam. To make it easier for you to understand the ideology that guided our revolution in Vietnam, I've decided to do the unthinkable. I ordered all of my college textbooks on Marxism-Leninism and Ho Chi Minh thought, and I'm studying them all again. Something I really thought I would never do. Because these books are boring as fuck. At least they were for me when I was a college student. Back then, honestly, I never thought I would need any of this knowledge ever in my life. I thought I would just be a normal girl with an office job for the rest of my life. But the world has gotten so scary so fast. Now I know that this knowledge is very important, and I'm glad I got to study Marxism-Leninism and Ho Chi Minh ideology so deeply as a student.
Okay, so we actually managed to acquire what seems to be a translation of one of these textbooks. I'm not actually entirely clear which one that is. Done presumably by Luna Oi herself. And it's sort of indicative of what we're going to be encountering as we go through this video. I'm going to read off a little bit. I don't know if it's going to be feasible to actually put it onto the screen, but let me just see if I can't pull it up quickly. Here. In fact, actually, let me see if I can't actually put it up this way. Oh, here we go. Good, so you can't see it. Let me center this quickly. Can you see this, Antonio?
Not on the screen that I'm looking at.
Okay, I'll read it out because I think it's only sharing the other window. So this is ostensibly taken from one of her textbooks. If Luna wants to clarify that this is mistaken, this was given to me by someone in my Discord, but it seems to be fairly consistent with what we'll be experiencing. So in the era, and I'm quoting now, in the era of Marx and Engels, the leading philosophical school of materialism was known as empiricism. The empiricists believe that we can only obtain knowledge through the experiences of our senses. I take issue with this immediately because it's not clear to me, at least, that empiricism must always be materialistic. Marx and Engels also considered themselves to be materialists. However, they believed that this strict empiricist view made materialism vulnerable to attack from idealists because it ignored rational knowledge and went beyond sense data. This invocation of rational knowledge, and you can correct me on this, this would seem to actually categorize, or this would seem to make what she is describing, or what this text is describing, as Marxist and Hegelian, or as of Marx and Engels materialism, essentially an idealist stance. In particular, hardline empiricism ignores social relations. God. which cannot be analyzed through sense data and sense observation alone. As Marx wrote in Capital Volume 1, the true reality of the value of commodities contrasts with the gross material reality of these same commodities, the reality of which is perceived by our bodily senses, in that not an atom of matter enters into the reality of value. We may twist and turn a commodity this way and that. As a thing of value, it still remains unappreciable by our bodily senses. In other words, Marx pointed out that no amount of sense data about a commodity will fully explain its value. One can know the size, weight, hardness, etc. of a commodity, but without analyzing the social relations and other aspects of the commodity, which can't be directly observed with the senses, one can never know or understand the true value of the commodity, which is fine. But the materialism of Marx and Engels saw the physical material world as the first basis for reality, but they also felt it was vital to account for other aspects of rational knowledge, such as social relations. So this is largely fine by my lights, with the exception that it really stresses the empiricism of materialism and doesn't seem to take into account at all the relations of time. And like the stuff that we're going to be going into here, specifically the idea of historical materialism as a dialectic, as rather an approach to understanding history that locates the major developments of social forms in developments in our modes of production and things like that. There isn't an element of time here. It's strictly speaking characterized in the terms of a liberal ideological approach, wherein these are frames of reference and points of view that you take on as an individual in analyzing the world that surrounds you sort of immanently. And I think that's fairly representative of what we're going to see. The issue is that Marx and Engels, and indeed Hegel, and to a certain extent Kant as well, from whom a lot of the form of the argument of historical materialism is taken, are concerned specifically with the unfolding, with explaining existent social forms by reference to the unfolding of potentialities of things already in the world. It's not a method that someone deploys like Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out who committed a crime. It's a scheme, or rather, it's an approach to understanding history that privileges certain anchoring elements, it's an approach to history that anchors the movement of history to specific elements that have a concrete development. And the dialectic part of that is our relationship to, or the way in which we metabolize the world, has an impact on how we structure our social relations, because of course those are going to be oriented around our engagement with the world. And that in turn, as well as like as we develop technologically, and technologically can mean socially, as well as like in the ways in which we like literally like extract calories from the ground. There's going to be a back and forth in which we do this, that changes the world we live in, that in turn changes how we engage with the world, which in turn changes us, and back and forth it goes. And social progress, or rather social change, and the myriad forms of complexity that we see today, that emerges from that. And Antonio, please let me know, you are the expert here, let me know if I'm going off the rails. But that, to my lights, is the essence of the mistake that Luna's video here is going to make. She is going to characterize dialectical materialism as a approach that an individual takes on in their individual analysis of things, even from the vantage point of the activists, say, how they engage with the world, rather than as an explanatory tool for understanding how historical social forms develop and and upon what they are contingent. That is to say, like it's not something that needs to be onboarded by activists, and it's not something that really can simply be taken on as a tool. So what do you think? Do you endorse that characterization, meandering as it was, if you could even follow it? I apologize, it's my feeling if you couldn't. But let me know.
No, okay, that made perfect sense, and I agree that dialectical materialism, if one may call it such, I mean, Engels calls it such, but Marx never used that term really. what Marx was mostly historical materialism, and the meaning of that is precisely what you said, that the whole thesis of historical materialism is the interplay between humans through labor, acting upon the world, building the world, objectifying certain desires, purposes, creating technologies, the means of production, sources of production, how that then allows certain relations to arise, how that then affects our consciousness, and our consciousness again integrates that totality, creates new technologies, new relations, and so on and so on and so on. And yeah, it's a systematic understanding of the world. It's not a on the moment per little bit basis that I'm going to dialectically interact with my fork today. No, that's not what it's for, and I don't know why you would want to use it that way.
Yeah, we'll get into why that might be the case, actually, because we had some comments on that, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts develop on that as well. But we'll let Luna carry on for a little bit, and we'll get into the thing proper. I just wanted to give you guys a taste going forward of what it is that Luna is referencing, because Luna is not deriving this from, shall we say, like the source material. She's getting this specifically from textbooks, and that in itself is instructive. And by the way, there are elements in here where I think Luna's fudging her knowledge a little bit, but for the most part, I do believe this was earnest. I believe she was taking on, and was, to the best of her ability, accurately portraying the contents of the textbooks that she received in Vietnam, in the Vietnamese educational system. And to that extent, like, even insofar as this video has a lot of problems in terms of the explication of these concepts that it presents, or that it derives from these texts, it's nonetheless a very interesting window into how these concepts are taught, at least in this cultural context. And that in itself makes this video of interest. It's difficult to tell exactly how accurate it is a representation of that per se, but it's got some interesting indications. But we'll stop rambling and we'll continue.
So I'm going to share this knowledge with you now, but I will try to make it much less boring than my college classes were. I was born and raised as a Marxist-Leninist. In Vietnam, we studied Marxist-Leninism and Ho Chi Minh thought from primary school all the way through college. I have always known that Marxism and Leninism helped my country fight against imperialism and colonialism and gain our own independence. But I never realized how little the rest of the world knows about Marxism-Leninism until I started this channel and started talking to my audience about it. I know that there are a lot of misconceptions about Marxism-Leninism, and I also know a lot of Black Lives Matter activists are starting to discuss whether Marxism and Leninism could be helpful for your movement. I have seen a lot of people, mostly liberals, but also a lot of leftists, say that Marxism is just for white people, and that Marx and Engels and Lenin were just a bunch of white dead guys, and that communism has nothing to do with black people or people of color. First of all, not all Marxists are white. And actually, the number of white Marxists today is way lower than the number of Marxists who are people of color, like myself. Ho Chi Minh, Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, Patrice Lumumba, Mao Zedong, they were some of the most important Marxist-Leninists in history, and none of them were white. Today, millions and millions of people of color around the world are Marxist-Leninists, and many people such as in the Philippines are fighting Marxist-Leninist revolutions right now. So please, don't erase us by saying that communism is only for white people. For me, the main goal of Marxism is to make people equal, to liberate all human beings. This ideology helps oppressed people realize the nature of capitalism and show us that a better society is possible. For over 100 years, Marxism has been tested all over the world. Many times, communism has almost been wiped out by capitalism.
Just a quick comment, by the way, in terms of showing that a better society is possible. The portrayal here is not going to be very good, but there's a point there in that the historic, and this is unfortunately something that's actually left out of the video, the historical bent of a dialectical materialist approach, or historical materialist approach. I'm a little bit unclear as to the distinction between those two, to be totally honest. But insofar as we mean a historical materialist approach, one of the principal benefits of that is that it emphasizes the contingency on concrete circumstances upon which most of even our most revered institutions are based. And one of the most insidious conservative arguments is that such and such is simply natural. Well, if you can show that no, actually such and such is dependent entirely upon a specific mode of interacting with the environment, something that is always going to be an invention, a technological invention of some kind, and will not be related to our our essential animal nature, if you will. Then you've demonstrated that things could have been otherwise, and therefore things could have very plausibly been better. You haven't definitively shown that, but you've broken down the aura of inevitability about those institutions, and I think that's not to be taken lightly. That's even if the prescriptions that emerge out of people sort of within this sphere of dogmatically adhering to the letter of a lot of the material here is fraught. Nonetheless, that is a massive contribution to our capacity to sort of think the actual range of possibilities that are really available to us.
Just to add something there.
Yeah, please.
Particularly when she mentioned that Marx wants us all to be equal. No, he does not. Marx is not an egalitarian. He makes that explicit in the German Ideology. He makes that explicit in the Critique of the Gotha program as well. Marx is quite literally one of those people. Just if you ever heard Chomsky talk about it, it's not about equality of ends. It's just equality of opportunity. Marx very much acknowledges that people aren't endowed with equal capacities. Some people are better than others at certain things. But just because you're different and are differently able doesn't mean that you should have a shitty life. So equality is not the end for Marx. Another thing is one should be wary of overemphasizing the technological element of Marxism. Also, one must remember the social relationship aspect of it as well. Where the technological aspect comes in is that technologies enable certain relationships and also disable certain relationships. So that, for example, the history of class society is the history of the enabling of the certain relationship of a privileged class with a certain relationship to the means of production and everyone else in relationship to that as well. The emphasis on communism is that literally technology will make it impossible for these kinds of relationships, which were class relationships, to continue just because it will not make any sense, right? If you have a super abundant productive society, the whole idea of, being a rich bourgeoisie and a poor worker is just not going to materially make any sense. It's just not, when you can just copy anything, like on the internet, right? Like copyrighting the internet for a large extent doesn't make any sense. You could just copy and paste, and it's just free data. It doesn't cost anything. You're not wasting anything. You're not stealing anything. And so any attempts to keep such things in play is just a waste of social energy and time.
Well said. We'll keep going.
To this day, Marxism still exists, and lately it's been growing more and more popular, even though capitalism has spent so much money and so many resources trying to wipe us out. For example, in the USA, capitalism is what gives the white supremacism and transphobia and all other forms of bigotry their power. It's the capitalist state that uses bigotry to divide the working class, and it's the capitalist state that allows racists and bigots to have so much power in American society. It's true, we cannot fight capitalism alone. We have to fight capitalism and systemic racism and other forms of bigotry together. But we will never be able to have an equal society until we defeat capitalism. Capitalists want to suppress Marxism because they know that these ideas are the biggest threat to their power structures. That's why I believe it is now necessary for all people around the world to seriously consider Marxism. I do personally believe that MarxismLeninism can liberate the black community and all communities, not just in the USA, but all around the world. But you cannot just copy exactly what Lenin did. You can't even copy what Ho Chi Minh did. Lenin and Ho Chi Minh both tailor Marxist philosophy for the material conditions of the time and place in which they lived. So, in order to make ideology useful, you have to learn how to use Marxist ideology creatively to apply our principles to your current material conditions. And these books actually do a great job teaching us how to do it. They were written by Vietnam's Ministry of Education. Basically, Vietnam's education system wanted to take information from a lot of different sources, such as Marx's Das Kapital, and Lenin's writings and Ho Chi Minh's writings, and streamline them all together into one curriculum which students could easily learn. And I have to admit, these books break things down in a way that is very simple and easy to understand. As far as I know, nobody has ever translated the text into English. So this might be the first time this info has ever been shared outside of Vietnam. I would like to eventually translate them fully into English, so if that's something you would be interested in, let me know in the comments. Maybe I can do a GoFundMe or something to try to translate them all. Follow me on Twitter or consider becoming my patron if you're interested in that. I will put the links in the description. But for now, I want to make the basic info available as quickly as possible, so I will make some videos that share the information as simply and entertainingly as possible, so it might help my comrades around the world. So let's crack these babies open and have some fun with communist ideology. Now let's start with Chapter 1, Introduction to the Basic Principles of Marxism-Leninism. Generally speaking, Marxism-Leninism is a system of ideas and scientific theories built by Marx and Engels and developed by Lenin. Marxism-Leninism is a philosophy that explains the dynamic laws of nature, society, and human thought. I will talk more about this dynamic law later in this video, but for now I can say this. Nature, society, and human thought always change, always move and develop. For thousands of years, Europeans tried to learn and explain this through philosophy. But there were some major limitations in those early ideas. Marx, Engels, and Lenin.
Oh, I believe Brooks may be ready to come in. Let me just make sure of this here. Actually, I think, do I need to make a voice call, a group call? Let's bring you in. Here we go, brilliant, okay. Hello, Brooks. How are you?
Doing well. What's up? How are you doing?
I am doing swell, thank you. We are about 7 minutes and 30 seconds in. We've already gone over this, so you know where we're at.
Yeah, I was already watching the stream.
Oh, perfect.
Because I hate myself that much.
God. No, I'm grateful to have you here actually, because we've had an interesting back and forth on the Vietnamese history section of this, and that'll be interesting to go over. But let me pull the screen up again for you both, so we're all on the same page, suffering together like true comrades. Here we go.
Try to create a new ideology to scientifically tackle all the problems with pre-existing European philosophy. Studying the development of human society is one of the most important purposes of Marxism. At the time Marx and Engels were alive, capitalism was getting stronger and stronger all over the world. They saw how the working class was exploited. They saw how the workers started to fight for their basic rights, and they saw the evil nature of capitalism. By the 1840s, the contradictions between the working class and the capitalist class in Europe has become really serious. There were a lot of workers' strikes and revolutions all over Europe. At that time, Marx, as a supporter for working class, knew that a revolution can only succeed if it has a clear ideology that is suitable with reality. This is why Marx and Engels developed their ideas. But it's also a fact that Marx and Engels did not create Marxism out of thin air. There were a lot of other people who inspired Marx and Engels. First, there were Hegel and Feuerbach. They were both German philosophers and famous for their German classic philosophy. One of Hegel's biggest achievements was
I'm a little bit curious about this. I'm not massively educated in German philosophy. I have read a decent amount of Hegel. What does that mean, German classical philosophy? Is that a term either of you recognize?
Probably what it's referring to is the post-Leibniz tradition up to Kant, which is Leibniz, Wolff, a few others, and then it culminates in the break with Kant.
Oh, so you would say that these figures, Feuerbach and Hegel, are being post-Kant. This is not that it doesn't bear on the conversation at all. It's not important. I was just curious. So this would probably be an erroneous classification. Doesn't matter. I wouldn't even put that on Luna's head. It's just, yeah.
critique of the metaphysical method. This model was based on dialectics. The dialectical method is an ancient form of discourse based on two or more people holding different points of view, trying to establish the truth by arguing.
I actually don't know if this is consistent with the ancient use of dialectic insofar as dialectic was used in antiquity, but my understanding is that this would be a dialogue.
I would say no, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I would say it isn't. It's more like a dialogue. But
yeah, when
because dialectic was specifically in Plato, for example, it was just a very pointed discussion about principles in which opposites were discussed, but it wasn't a debate. It wasn't in terms of trying to win, but it was in trying to see the partial truth of each side and trying to come closer to the truth. In most Platonic dialogues, this fails, but in Hegel, the dialogue form is completely out. It just becomes a principle of just what happens when you push concepts to their absolute limit.
Yeah, fair enough. But I think crucially as well, the dialectical method isn't a form of discourse. It's a discursive approach to analysis, effectively. Or insofar as like you're doing a dialectical analysis or analyzing a dialectic, you are analyzing an emergence from a relationship of two things that are going back and forth. It's not a form of discourse in and of itself, in the literal sense, at least, of two human beings.
It literally is German for dialogue.
Oh, is it actually?
So just saying, like, there's a direct derivation that word didn't come out of nowhere. I believe it's spelled with K's instead of C's because of the lovely language, but we are talking about like just the word. It's definitely just means dialogue. In context of Hegel, in context of this, in context of that tradition, it is not just the standard sort of traditional debate, but like there's a reason it's used as it is, and the derivation is what it is.
Okay. All right, let's roll with that. The only reason why I want to pin down that is because if this is going to be used to cement an understanding of what a dialectic is going forward, that could be a little bit confusing. But we'll keep going.
Yeah, within Hegelianism or Marxism, it's not just the literal thing. There's more to it. I'm just saying that the literal word does mean this. So just so we can talk about where some truth is coming from.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's kind of like debate. In Europe, dialectics go back to ancient times, when Socrates and Plato and Aristotle wrote philosophical texts in the form of arguments between different characters. Dialectics were also used in ancient Asia. Taoism is an ancient philosophy that presents the world as made up of opposites in conflicts with each other. For thousands of years, philosophers in Asia have used dialectical logic to examine the human experience. It's interesting to note that Asian Marxist-Leninists like Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh blended Asian dialectical principles into Marxist-Leninism, but that's a topic for another time. For now, you should just understand that dialectics just means trying to find the truth by arguing from different sides. Hegel developed dialectics to form clear arguments with a scientific system of laws and categories, but Hegel was an idealist. That means Hegel believed that the world experience is not the real world, because we experience it in our thoughts and in our own minds. We are only able to see and hear and touch an ideal world, not the real physical world.
What do we think of this claim?
No. No, that's not what idealism means. This might seem very strange to you. Idealism for Hegel literally just means partedness. So ideal entity, the idealization of things for Hegel is just to realize that they are parts of something else. A fragment, a figment, just kind of the way that you say, oh, that's just an idea. I mean, that's just a passing little figment of your mind. That's what Hegel thinks of idealization is, both for mental things as well as for material, objective things, if you would call them that. That's all it is. It's the notion that everything hangs together as a whole, and all finite things are just parts or idealized in that whole. So it has nothing to do with consciousness. It has nothing to do with mentality in the usual way people think about it.
No, oddly enough,
this whole distinction.
Yeah, this seems to be more of a vulgarization of of Kant's position of the sort of unbridgeable divide between things in themselves and our representations of them in our minds. This doesn't seem like it seems to me that this would completely belie Hegel's attempt to overcome that by, situating us as the things touching on both those things in themselves as, the things which contain the representations of those in some respect. That would seem to belie the fact that he situates us as the middle term, which again gives us some point of contact to those things, so that yes, in a very limited sense, we can know a little bit about the things in themselves as they are, because we need to, in some sense, make some kind of have some kind of sensory relationship with them, some kind of determinative relationship with them, in order to even have the presentation of them in the first place.
Yeah, just to say that Hegel does not deny the reality of matter. He does not deny that nature exists and that it exists before us and after us, independent of our subjective individual minds. And so this is just like a weird attack of a doctrine which really nobody believes. Like, even if you go look before Hegel, when people were called idealists, there's almost nobody you can find that will deny that nature exists and that it's independent of individual minds.
The Hackett introduction to Kant's Critique of Pure Reason is actually, I like that for this reason, because it really hammers down that point. Even Kant is not denying the reality of space or the reality of time or whatever real thing in the world, whatever that means, that our conceptions, space and time, approximate there too, or things like gravity or whatever. He's just saying that we can't talk about them with the same degree of specificity as we can things that already presume extension in space and time, like objects that we think about. We have a limited capacity to speak about things that can only be understood metaphysically, because of course our sensory apparatus and even our thinking is governed by like these foundational these foundational principles. So we can't get outside of them because they constitute us. And so, like, we can't, like, say what things in themselves are or are like from some godlike vantage. But that doesn't mean they're not real. It just means we are epistemologically constrained in some very radical ways.
Well, that's the phrasing here that's difficult, is the line, we are only able to see and hear and touch an ideal world, not the real physical. I mean, for Lacan, where we have no ability to interact with the real, we still see, touch, and hear it. There's no nature that I'm only touching the idealized thing. My cognition is the only idealized. With Kant, even, it's not that I don't touch it. I do. It's what touch is or what I'm touching that the syntheses cognize or create through representation. So the wording here is very odd.
Yeah, I agree. We'll keep going.
So, Hegel and other idealists believed that the best way to discuss and try to understand the world was through the self-conscious mind. Basically, Hegel was more concerned with trying to find truth through thought than through trying to look at the physical world.
I think this is untrue.
Holy shit.
Yeah,
untrue.
Yeah. I'll give my novice critique of this, and I'll let you guys fill in and make me look like an idiot in front of the audience. That's what they're here for, anyways. I think that the dichotomy, first of all, even accepting this language is radically off. It seems to me that Hegel wasn't concerned with trying to find truth through thought, rather than trying to look at the physical world. Rather, he seems to deprivilege, in a sense, thought over a kind of subtly dualistic approach to defining thought as separate from the physical world. Again, like, to go back to the Critique of Kant, where he situates us as a kind of middle term that actually puts us into contact with things in themselves, such that we actually have a stronger relationship with the underlying reality, if you will, than like a skeptic like Kant might argue. And like we can actually, like, understand the physical world in similar terms as we understand thought. What would you guys say to this?
I would say that the relationship Hegel accords of with thought and matter or nature, particularly in the form of truth, is that truth is a concept of reason. Like to speak of truth outside of reason or thought is to speak literally nonsense. It has no meaning. Nature in and of itself is neither true nor false because it has no concepts to correspond to of its own. Truth is a concept in which we speak of the correspondence of things to something. We say, something is true because either the thought corresponds or the thing corresponds to the thought. And Hegel is so radical that he says even reason has a correspondence, and the correspondence of reason is, of course, to itself. So the truth as such would be the correspondence of reason to itself as a process of reasoning. And then that just cascades to everything else.
Okay.
And that leaves plenty of room for everything else you could possibly want to do. If you want to be a Marxist and go and try to find out what the truth of society and objective material processes are, you can totally do that with Hegelian concept of truth. It makes no difference. Well, it makes a difference, but because it gives you an ultimate grounding. But other than that, you can be a materialist with it or an idealist with it.
Well, Marx appears to be funny.
I mean, and I would the only thing I would add really quick is just that Hegel's writings are filled with observations of the physical world and critiques of other people's observations of them. So I mean, he did that. So
yeah, and I mean, the first part of the phenomenology of spirit is largely concerned with an approach to the emergence of what we would call natural science. So, he's intimately concerned with the physical world. He's just also intimately concerned with the fact that we engage with the physical world, in to a certain extent inside of ourselves. So
this is why Hegel developed his system of dialectics to try to find the best ways to argue and understand about the world from an idealist perspective. Now let's look at Feuerbach, another German philosopher who influenced Marx and Engels. Feuerbach moved Hegel's dialectical method from the idealistic view to the materialistic view. Materialism is the opposite of idealism. Materialists believe that it is possible to measure, observe, and understand our physical world through provable scientific methods, and that materialism is the best way to understand our world.
I don't think this is contrary to idealism, but I want your takes on that.
Well, it's contrary to certain kinds of idealism. It's not contrary to Hegel's idealism. Hegel totally allows for the measure of things empirically, and Hegel's not interested in that, really. As a matter of fact, there's a funny little paragraph in the early introduction, the preface to the Phenomenology, in which Hegel says, if you're interested in, what day did Napoleon cross, across the state line and invade this one nation state, he's like, well, that's not a philosophical question. I'm not interested in that.
I think even Kant allows for it. It strikes me as a strange statement to it's a strange dichotomy to make that only, especially again, given the history of empiricists, idealists, frankly, to state that is the sharp divide between materialism and idealism. It's a strange move to make. But again, I think it bears repeating that we're talking about a textbook explanation of this, and not, we're not talking about Hegel's encyclopedia. We're talking about a state textbook that's probably not going to be particularly rigorous. I don't want to lay this on Luna's shoulders. I don't think she was being in any way dishonest here. It's just it's kind of a strange insistence to me.
So, Feuerbach took the dialectical method of Hegel and applied it to material analysis. Marx and Engels were heavily influenced by Feuerbach, but they believed that he was inconsistent with materialism. Sometimes he would present arguments idealistically, and sometimes he would use materialism. So they took the ideas of Hegel and Feuerbach and developed them to create their system of understanding the world, which we call Dialectical Materialism. So in order to understand Marxism and Leninism, you have to learn how to examine the world with dialectical materialism. That means you need to be able to dialectically argue about the world from a materialist perspective.
Yeah, see, I don't like this phrasing. Because, and this is going to be reiterated throughout the video, she's going to characterize dialectical materialism as, again, a form of approach to debate and analysis that one as an individual takes on, not as a frame of analysis for understanding the emergence of things and the continuance of things in history, or the evolution of things in history, rather. You don't use dialectical materialism to dialectically argue, and I think, again, like I'm a little bit sketchy on the equivocation between dialogue and dialectic, because dialectic seems to refer to, like, they have a similar grounding in speech between two participants, but one appears to be referring to it sort of from, like, viewing the speech itself as a separate thing, whereas dialogue tends to be emphasizing the actual relation between two agents in time, X and Y, talking to each other and having a conversation, as opposed to the conversation's life itself as it emerges from that dialogue and is carried on by other people and has its own independent life and existence over time. We can think of the history of, like, state forms as something very similar to that. Like the individuals and the individual institutions and the individual places even that related to each other and to the world to produce these diverse political forms that populate our history. They're gone, but nonetheless, the development itself still persists and evolves and continues. But yeah, this framing is very strange to me.
Perspective. Wow, that still sounds complicated, doesn't it? But you know, it's interesting. I think it's easier to understand in Vietnamese. In Vietnamese, we call dialectical materialism chủ nghĩa duy vật biện chứng. Biện chứng is dialecticals, and it means arguing according to evidence. I think the Vietnamese version will help you understand the difference between Hegel's dialectical idealism and Marx's dialectical materialism, because Marx and Engels believe in using provable material evidence to argue dialectically.
What does that mean? Like, what do you think of this? Oh, you guys still with me?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. I know, I've subjected you to this twice.
I've subjected myself to this now 4 times because, like I was saying to you last night, I believe these things are teachable moments, that it's someone who really seems to, and I believe she does, want to know about this stuff and want to learn and want to expose herself to this theory in her audience. And sometimes, though, I don't even know where to hang my hat and start the discussion.
Well, anyways, so to go where you stopped, the whole thing about evidence is just not really part of any dialectical notion, mainly because what the problem about these notions, as orthodox dialectical materialism is generally portrayed, and what it actually says in its own doctrines, is that there's nothing dialectical about it, really. What they're describing is just regular, pragmatic, empirical, contingent, contextual considerations. I mean, this is not anything specific to their point of view. Everybody does it. Who doesn't?
Yeah.
You know?
I would even go so far as the issue with using the word provable material evidence as though there is some kind of unprovable material evidence, or the layering of these words, which end up creating sort of an a priori justification for what you're arguing in the end. To me, that kind of stuff immediately starts going against a sort of more materialist stance when you're having those discussions as, no, my evidence is provable, my evidence is more, my evidence is bigger, whatever it may be. You're not even talking about that side of things anymore at that point.
Yeah, I think this is really where it bears remembering that this is derived from a state textbook, because it seems like the concern is not so much to give a robust account of dialectical materialism, but to argue that the brand of dialectical materialism, or the brand of Marxist thought generally, is kosher to a modern empirical approach, because of course we have the constant the constant rhetorical associations between Marxism, dialectical materialism, all this stuff, with idealism in the sense of like a kind of naive utopianism. And that is what this seems to be primarily geared towards arguing against. Again, like I don't think this is on Luna. I think Luna's just using a fundamentally bad source. It is interesting in and of itself that this is like what is taught, because I mean the upshot of that is that these supposedly Marxist-Leninist textbooks are really only so in name, because they're basically just teach, as far as I can tell, again, because these were not translated into English, but what we've seen is it's just a vulgar empirical approach to science, and that's it. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, except that it's being sold as the essence of Marxism, which it's not. There's nothing distinctively. There's nothing distinct about that. That's something that's shared by basically Marx and all of his antagonists. Thank you, Chris Morlock, for the $5.
Yeah, I would just add that.
Oh, go on, please.
Yeah, I would just add that it's. I wouldn't just say it's just state propaganda from Vietnam, but this is just what the orthodox dialectical materialist position was. From Lenin to Mao to Ho Chi Minh and everyone else who was part of that milieu, and part of that blame lays on Engels' Dialectics of Nature, where he was the one who put forth this notion of dialectical materialism with the laws of dialectics, which is a whole load of nonsense when you actually read it. And it's just like, well, it's dogmatic, really. It's just this dogmatic notion of what the logic, which supposedly they get out of Hegel, is, which has nothing to do with Hegel, really, beyond just the name dialectics, and choosing some little key things like, oh, the change of quantity into quality, and all that jazz.
You have me
and
at a bit
really
of a
strip it down and you analyze it. It's
yeah. You have me at a bit of a disadvantage because I haven't read Engels in any depth. But where are we here? Yes, I have been going a little bit into Lenin's State and Revolution. This is just such a cool cover. But he draws significantly in the early chapters on Engels' Origin of the Family, and one of the things that struck me is just how resonant this is with some very careful and frankly, like, very easily translatable into historical materialist terms, his account of the emergence of the family institution and the state institution. There's a lot here that's resonant with even, granted a liberal, but anthropologists like Fustel de Collage, who again are like very much sensitive again to that sort of approach. So I suppose what I'm wondering is that basically a mutilation of the theory for reasons that Luna herself gives, that like realistically this stuff is heady, it's difficult to actually synthesize if you don't have a lot of time to spend on it. Was this a way to sell the brand of dialectical materialism and Marxism to people who just frankly bluntly didn't have the time to get the background knowledge requisite to like making the distinctions or the specific moves that Marx and Engels were making in terms of their historical and otherwise analysis, even significant in terms of what they were moving away from? Is there like a fundamental divide between the popularization of these terms and the actual theory that they originated to describe?
Yeah, I would say so. Because what you mentioned right there, Engels' account of the origin of the family is considered to be I haven't read it myself, but I've talked with friends who have, and it sounds like very good historical materialist analysis, very spot on to what you're supposed to do. When you do an analysis of that kind, the way you explicate. Just like Marx's, 18th Brumaire, it's a very good historical materialist analysis. That's what it looks like. But when you read those works, pay attention. You don't find the formalism that they speak of with these so-called laws of dialectics. It doesn't look that way at all.
Thank you, Chris Morlock, for the $5. Luna and non-compete are not representatives of dialectical materialism. Get off your butt, President Sunday, and debate infrared or Haas on this. I'm not opposed to dialectical materialism, and I thought infrared was Haas. I'm not particularly keen to be yelled at by a man in a tank top for 3 hours, but thank you nonetheless for supporting the channel. Let's continue.
That's very important for understanding dialectical materialist thinking. For now, just remember, dialectical materialism is all about understanding the world by forming arguments which are based on evidence which we get from the real world.
Antonio, you're the expert. How would you characterize dialectical materialism? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Like from what standpoint? I mean, like what she's presenting is dialectical materialism. What that goes under the name of is just that orthodox position of that put forth in part by Lenin, put forth in part by Stalin, put forth in part by Mao, and they all say the generally exact same points. So
they say dialectical materialism
is
understanding
indeed
the world by forming arguments which are based on evidence.
Well, that particular formulation, no. But what she's been saying about, the assumption is everything, the final condition of everything is material, that you look at the material conditions, so on and so on. Yeah, that's part of the orthodoxy. And they do, and the whole point about evidence, I think, is just this attempt to emphasize this as a scientific method equivalent to scientific method as we understand it generally today, which is, an actual practical thing which scientists do to acquire knowledge and efficacy in the world. But Marx, with historical materialism, is partly to blame because he sometimes implies that that's what he wants to be doing, but in other times it's very clear that it's just an explanatory, systematic outlook on things, which is not going to have an immediate practical efficacy, like making an experiment and figuring out some kind of laws of operation of a thing.
Yeah, I suppose my primary issue here is there's nothing to distinguish dialectical materialism from basically even primitive science, which has no firm distinction between evidence we get from the real world and evidence derived from, I guess to a certain extent the Aristotelian approach is getting evidence from the real world, but what actually distinguishes dialectical materialism on this particular read? Because again, as you say, yes, this is certainly a part of it. Dialectical materialism or historical materialism absolutely relies on data in order to be significant and meaningful and particularized to actual historical cases.
You're talking about signification. That's the difference. A dialectical materialist being said by someone on the left or dogmatic Marxist is no different from someone on the right saying they fight with facts and logic and not feelings, or they're a rational actor, or whatever term they may use. It's their justification saying that that they are the ones who are rational, they are the ones using evidence, and no one else is doing so, and they're doing so from a very specific political position. That's all it is triangulating themselves inside of that.
So you would characterize this description then as being consistent, but not bearing any of the real content of the actual theorists from which.
So I'm not Antonio. Yeah. I don't have the background, but I will say, look, it's a term you run into in a lot of, and I put quotes in the air, leftist circles. It's been around for a long time, and it's a term that's used, but it is essentially a more or less meaningless term in and of itself because it's not directly connected to the theory that people claim it's connected to, as Antonio has been kind of getting into, that there's connections to it, parts to it, but it is not some sort of heady, deep philosophical thing that is unique to a specific position.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. That this doesn't actually provide any demarcation from any practical outlook that we would call scientific in general. It's just trying to bolster the ideology by slapping dialectical materialism onto it and, clearly linking it to the standard notions of science. And that's it.
Yeah, I suppose where I find this, like, sort of, just kind of obviously impoverished is that as soon as we're, like, invoking the term dialectical, well, we're immediately invoking a relation in time. And so, like sure, materialism may be all about forming our ideas by reference to our sensory experience of the real world and not trying to do metaphysics in effect. But the dialectical part, that situates that in history. We're not just talking about our relationship with the real world, we're talking about an approach that deals with multiple things interacting in time. Like there's a third dimension to this, and it just seems like this characterization fundamentally buries that. Now, if that's common use, then I guess it is what it is. But it strikes me as really missing the point of what these terms were initially invoked to describe. Like, it seems like it represents a loss.
Well, and not to preview later in the video, it is, because the utilization, as she goes into it, of how she explains we can use dialectical materialism in the examples are deeply, one, dogmatic, and both a priori. They're not like actually material realities of any people on the ground, which we can get into in various ways. But this is a term used that signifies, here's my positions, I'm over on this side of the fence on the red team or the blue team, red team I guess in this case, and let's go, I'm right, rather than the far more difficult thing of, hey, actually, what made this thing happen? I don't know, we should figure it out, which is a different beast.
Yeah.
Does it make sense? I hope so. Now let's talk about Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Smith and Ricardo also influenced Marx and Engels with their concepts of profit and political economics. They help Marx and Engels understand the concepts of value and profit, the importance of material production, and the economic rules which bring all these ideas together. But Adam Smith and David Ricardo could not distinguish between simple production and capitalist production.
This is actually correct. I just want to touch on this very quickly because Antonio, you helped me learn this last night, or at least solidify this. So, and I'm not familiar with Ricardo at all, but I read a little bit of Smith, and Smith deals, of course, with like primitive production and things like that. But the issue is he appears to project sort of like modern forms of production, specifically commodity production, backwards in time, and he simply subtracts elements from it. And so even if he distinguishes between what we would characterize today as capitalist production from primitive production, he doesn't, in fact, because he essentializes what would become known to be capitalist production as being just sort of endemic to the human condition. We're always engaged in producing commodities and bringing them to market and that kind of thing. Something like that. And again, guys, you know this stuff better than I do, so please correct me lest I mislead my audience horribly.
Yeah, that was pretty much correct. It's just that basically for Adam Smith, economics is economics, and economics is just production for him. So, primitive production and capitalist production are just distinguished not in kind, but in degree.
Yeah. And this matters because, of course, Marx's approach to economics and his critique of political economy is going to be attack specifically that one-sidedness, where you simply treat the mode of production as being on one side and the social form as being on another, and these not actually directly producing each other, which they do.
I figured out some...
Real quick,
Yeah,
I'm more hesitant with Ricardo. Ricardo's book, Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, goes in depth. Now, depending on how you may define political or capital production versus traditional, it may matter less, but to me, capitalist production specifically has to deal with excess profit derived through industrial or financial means that are utilized for the basically propagation of further capital creating itself. Ricardo definitely saw that there was a change and talked about it as such, that the current system, he talked about it as such, the banking, the laws, the way that they were made. He harped on that pretty strongly, and through him and his writing, like, it may not have been I'm less comfortable with saying that about Ricardo. I'm more familiar with Ricardo, granted, but I'm less comfortable saying that because of how he sort of treated a lot of things. Rent, for example, he was very crisp and clear about that being a modern phenomenon, and developed the theories of how rent works and profits and things like that. So I'm more hesitant to say he didn't have an understanding, or at least some semblance of knowing the difference between traditional and capitalist production, depending on how you define that.
Thank you for that. All right, we'll keep going. I haven't read any of these people in any depth, so that's actually extraordinarily interesting.
The basic principles of production, but didn't really understand the nature of capitalism. So Marx and Engels applied dialectical materialism to the science of economics to understand the true nature of capitalism.
This is good.
Marx and Engels also learned a lot from Saint-Simon, Charles Fourier, and Robert Owen, who were all utopianists.
So this part bothers me, just because it demonstrates, again, like a really unproductive approach to explication. So she's going to go into an explanation of how the utopianists failed, but she's effectively going to say nothing but that these people were utopianists, whatever that means, and they failed. And then she's going to move on and treat that as if she explained a concrete position that Marx and Engels were responding to, but she basically describes them by name only, so it's frustrating. And I don't like this because it makes me wonder, because again, we're relying on her translation of a text that we don't have access to. How often is this done? And I don't like it.
Utopianists saw that the early industrial working class was very miserable. They lived under terrible conditions, and utopianists believed that a better world could be built. For instance, Robert Owen was a wealthy textile manufacturer who tried to build a better society in New Harmony, Indiana, in the USA. Owen purchased the entire town in 1825 to try and build an ideal society. They believed they could create a new moral world of happiness, enlightenment, and prosperity through education, science, technology, and communal living. Owen's vision failed after 2 years for a variety of reasons, and a lot of other rich capitalists in the early 19th century had similar plans which also failed. So, utopianism did a good job at criticizing capitalism by exposing the miserable situations of poor workers and offering a vision of a better society. But utopianism was not scientifically, materialistically grounded.
See, we needed an explanation of why they failed and what specifically dialectical materialism grants that these lacked. Because literally all we have is utopianism was bad socialism. It didn't work. Marx and Engels, they had good super-duper socialism. It was scientifically, materialistically grounded. That one was better. But, like, I need... This doesn't explain anything. And that in itself isn't a problem, because you can just cut it out and not have it there. But it makes me wonder if this is the kind of argumentation she's willing to put in. Like, the other stuff has been a bit more fine-grained, so it seems a little bit safer. It's still been wrong in a lot of cases, but I worry, like, if we're even getting an accurate representation of the textbook now, because this is really sloppy.
So,
Fourier specifically, actually, one of the utopians she mentions, Fourier is mentioned in the German Ideology by Marx and Engels, where they kind of directly talk about his ideas and thoughts, so might be a good place to start with that.
Were not ideologically prepared to replace capitalism. Utopianists did not understand how capitalism developed and the role of the working class in revolution. And this is why, according to Marx and Engels, they failed. So, Marx and Engels developed an ideology to overcome all these different shortcomings. Marxism predicts that capitalism, which is so terribly flawed, is not the end goal and could never be the end goal of human society.
Is this an accurate representation? It seems to me that it's not so much that capitalism is terribly flawed, it's just that it's unstable. It's a stage towards a kind of crystallized state of affairs that has some longevity built in. But it's not that it's inherently flawed. It's not treated as like a societal plan. It's a state of affairs. It's a condition in which we produce and exchange in particular ways. Again,
Yeah, I would say so.
yeah, I think we're falling back again on like a very liberal view where we treat these things as if they are approaches that you on board, or like ideals that you on board as an individual subject, and not like attempts to explain the processes of the emergence of social forms historically, among other things. Like, there's just a general, like, and this goes back again, I think that these textbooks were primarily concerned to say that, hey, look, as you were saying, Brooks, earlier, socialism is scientific, and they weren't really concerned with actually portraying the theory well.
Marx and Engels argue that communism is the true end goal that we should strive towards. Communist societies is a society that is stateless, classless, and everybody is equal and there is no exploitation. No class is more important or powerful than any other class, and no race is superior to any other race. So, Marxism is the science of moving society away from capitalism and towards communism. This science was developed using dialectical materialism. So now that you understand the historical background and the philosophers that influenced Marx and Engels, let's start to really try to understand dialectical materialism.
And just to cap this off, like, we really didn't get an explanation of these predecessors to Marx and Engels. We had references to them that characterized them as in some vague sense inadequate, but that's all we got. So insofar as she's trying to explain Marx and Engels by reference to that from which they were trying to distance themselves, or to that to which they were responding, which is an admirable approach, she just didn't do that. So again, like, I don't think she was like trying to fudge this, but like in effect she kind of did, because this was just a stack of black boxes that gets us from point A to point B, but we don't actually know how we got there.
Well, I mean, you're talking again when we talk about how she's using the terms. Marxism, as she says here, is the process of pushing towards communism. I mean, there's a difficulty there I have with that sentence, because Marxism, I don't think necessarily has a goal that's determinate. Now, yes, the act of going more Marxist is going to push us that direction. As we break things down, perhaps you can make those arguments, but I'm hesitant to say that Marxism has inherently a goal of a specific thing within it, instead of just being the process itself. But that's maybe just me.
No, I think that's right.
Ideally.
Yeah, I think like Marx, of course, like has his preference, and he throws in his lot with a particular side. But like this goes back to, again, like my critique of Keith Wood's approach to this, where he was talking about Marx's moralism. Marx is just trying to describe the world here. Dialectical materialism doesn't take sides. It's a mode of analysis, and like even the baddies on like your typical Marxist view, like they have a role to play. Like they're a part of this description of the world. They aren't simply a piece to be extricated. They're an element in the totality. You can't understand the whole without reference to them, and they are likewise emergent, just as like again the universal class or the proletariat or whatever are emergent from history, and they're understood in the same way. Like it just doesn't seem. It's again, it's just treating it as if it was a liberal ideology and not as an attempt to understand history scientifically.
I would even say it's an idealistic view of Marx. What is communism? Now, we can define it out as it's a classless, stateless society, and kind of, I would say, stop there. But there is a undercurrent within the left, just in general, when we talk about that as a goal. What does it mean also? And as we have that sort of representation and that ideal of what communism is, and we're striving towards it, there's a deep almost irony in saying that the goal of Marxism is communism as an ideal.
The more proper thing to say would be, at least Marx thinks this is the case. Marx thinks it's a conclusion of the method. Like, it's not a goal that he wanted, it's a conclusion that he sees coming, just logically out of the unfoldment of the things. And another thing I'd have to say is that, this is an idealistic view, and also in the sense of it is ideology. in which, strangely, these people who consider themselves Marxists don't look at the world materialistically like Marx does, in which they're not thinking about forces of production or relations of production. They're thinking about these as political goals. This is just more of a political stance rather than any engaged materialist stance. If you're a materialist, you'd be engaged with trying to understand a lot of the engineering issues and stuff going on. You'd be very interested in, say, like stuff like blockchain or whatever, the internet in general, and how these technologies enable and disable certain relations of production, and what that means for the movement forward of the development of society. And I don't find that to be generally something that the left is interested in today.
You're not wrong, and if I can say, that was very eloquently said. I like that.
Yeah, I second that. The last part is it's what's terrifying is just how mundane a sentence that is now. Just the total disinterest in what really should be the defining feature of it. At this stage, being on the left literally means nothing except having some vague antagonism to the right. Otherwise, it has no content. Like, what are we even talking about? The left just describes everybody who's...
they're all reactionaries, so it doesn't even matter.
There you go.
We already explained that dialectical materialism is making arguments based on material evidence.
Okay, and here we get into it. Here we get into it. She's basically going to equivocate between dialectical materialism and empiricism, which, like, okay, we can make this a coherent video just by substituting empiricism with dialectical materialism, and it's more or less fine then. But now you're basically just burying whatever peculiarity dialectical materialism as a concept had, and replacing it with some Bill Nye garbage, so...
But how does it actually work? How do you apply dialectical materialism to problems?
You don't. You apply it to history.
This is something we study in Vietnam from childhood. It's a key part of our curriculum in school, just like history and math and language. Once you learn dialectical materialism, you will start seeing the world in a different way. In fact, I will admit it, sometimes it's frustrating when I try to have discussions with people from the USA and Europe who don't study dialectical materialism, because it feels like we are looking at the world in a completely different ways. I really think dialectical materialism can help us understand the world and each other. So, let's learn how to think dialectically. To understand how dialectical materialism works, you have to understand what is matter, what is consciousness, and what is the relationship between the two.
This is a really weird sentence to me if we're talking specifically about Marx. This makes sense to me if we're talking about Hegel, and Antonio, you went into a little bit about this earlier today. But how would you assess this sentence here? To understand how dialectical materialism works, you have to learn what is matter, what is consciousness, and the relationship between the two.
I would answer that as far as Marx, without relationship to Engels, is concerned, Marx did not care about this kind of question. What is matter? Well, that's a metaphysical question, and despite how much Marx and Engels talk shit about metaphysics, it's not that they think that there's no such thing as a metaphysical understanding of things. You can talk about matter as such. Marx, however, is not interested in that. Marx is interested in human society, human labor. Therefore, historical materialism is distinguished from dialectical materialism, particularly in this way. The historical materialism is the understanding of the world which is human, the social human world, from the standpoint of the lived laboring experience of human beings in said world. So one could say, and rather one must say, that for Marx, historical materialism is what the logic is for Hegel. It is the ultimate standpoint of understanding of everything. That this is the ultimate explanatory system in which everything else is to be made sense of. Every other science is to be made sense of according to the history of human labor in the natural world and the way that relates. You mentioned earlier that we appear in the world, we have conditions, we work on the world, we change those conditions change us, we change our understanding of the world, we change the conditions, and so on, and that's a development society. Marx is just not interested in the concept of matter as such. As for what is consciousness, Marx also does not have very much interest in what consciousness as such is. He has interest in human consciousness as a self-understanding, as a way we understand our position in the world in relationship to how we're working in it. In which case, historical materialism would be the highest understanding or the highest consciousness of the world. And dialectical materialism is particularly what I mentioned way earlier, which is what comes up with Engels in this attempt to, unfortunately, one, ape Hegel and also ape empirical science, and bring them together in a rather unfortunate, messed up arrangement of really simplistic and rather banal doctrines.
To add to that, I just think it's worth quoting a bit from German ideology, which is Marx. Men can be distinguished from animals by consciousness, by religion, or anything else you like. They themselves begin to distinguish themselves from animals as soon as they begin to produce their means of subsistence, a step which is conditioned by their physical organization. By producing their means of subsistence, men are indirectly producing their actual material life. There you go.
Yeah.
First, what is matter? Well, the philosophical definition of matter is different from the definition of matter used in hard sciences like physics and chemistry. According to Lenin, matter is a philosophical category denoting objective reality, which is given to man in his sensations and which is copied, photographed, and reflected by our sensations, while existing independently of them. Under this philosophical viewpoint, the most common attribute of all forms of matter is objective existence. It means matter always exists no matter what, whether humans recognize it or not.
That strikes me as very strange, because I can't think of, and again, I'm a novice here, but I can't think of any counter or any position contra this, except for like the idealism of someone like Berkeley, where you have God creating the impressions of the world around us. I'm butchering this, but like the point is the stuff in the world isn't actually there. It's an emanation from something else into our minds. That doesn't strike me as in any way contradictory to the use of the term matter in the natural sciences. But furthermore, it's not, and I may be ignorant of this, but it's not clear to me that there is a strict definition of what matter is in the natural sciences. It seems that the natural sciences definitionally can't get behind that because they are specifically concerned with matter, and they use matter in order to analyze matter. You use, among other things, like your instruments and the things upon which your findings are given is comprised of the stuff of the world. We distinguish between matter and energy, maybe, but like even that falls apart at a certain level of analysis. So it's just not clear to me that this is like a meaningful distinction, that matter means what exists no matter what. Like, obviously there's a thing that exists no matter what. We're not solipsists here. So, like, now she invokes Lenin, which is interesting, because again, like, Lenin, from what I've been hearing, he dips a little bit back from Marx's concern specifically with the human world, and he actually starts dipping in a little bit to, like, the hard philosophy stuff again. But like this is just strange to me. And of course I've been reading a lot of Rorty recently, so like this characterization of like the matter as a thing which we reflect in our minds is inherently noxious to what I'm sort of like faddishly onboarding as a complete novice philosopher. But yeah, I don't know. I just find this very odd.
Yeah, it's just a regression to vulgar materialism, really. Unfortunately, again, this is due to Engels, who should have known better in the Dialectics of Nature. I think mainly it was a problem of presentation rather than that Engels didn't know a finer distinction. But a lot of people just took that as dogma and doctrine and just repeated endlessly. And, well, Engels said it. Engels was a friend of Marx. Marx must have believed this too, and they take Marx as a prophet. They treat Marx like the Bible. Lenin later actually walks this back. A lot of people read his stuff that's pre his reading of the Logic, the Science of Logic by Hegel, and after Lenin reads the Science of Logic, he has a big change on his views of materialism, idealism.
Sorry, go on, please.
I'd also say that the quote from Lenin, I'm not even sure necessarily leads logically to the idea that objective matter exists no matter what. The line, and this is, I think, from even his earlier stuff, there isn't like this hyper objective reality that sounds like something out of Ayn Rand, which is kind of how this is being interpreted. This is much more about the way that images are reflected into consciousness, even though the object exists independently. And this is not this idea of like a reality exists objectively in a way we can perceive it. He's literally just saying copy, photograph, and reflect it. He had nowhere says that there's objective. It's just this really odd interpretation of it that sounds, again, like something out of Ayn Rand. Like it's almost a quote that she could say, that the objective reality exists outside of man. That's something she'd say. So
that's a good point. And in fact, like the wording of this, it's a lot more moderate, isn't it? He's not saying this is what matter is. He's saying matter is a philosophical category denoting objective reality, which is given to man in sensations. He's talking about how matter is spoken of in philosophy that he's acquainted with. He's not even making a definitive statement about the world.
Yep.
Yeah, and we can include even like, which is copied, photographed, and reflected by our sensations while existing independently of them. This can just be a description of how matter is spoken of. He's not actually making a statement concerning that. Yeah, so, okay, yeah, fair enough.
But whether humans recognize it or not. If I measure a rock and it weighs 1 kilogram, it will still weigh 1 kilogram when you measure it. We can't argue about that. It's just a fact. It doesn't change based on my opinion or your opinion. Matter is objective. Matter can affect humans' feelings. If I pick up that 1 kilogram rock and throw it in your head, you will probably feel some emotions about that. So,
I want to just touch on this quickly because this was something that Vosh criticized, which was actually a bit off point. Like, yes, of course, like what is a kilogram is going to depend upon like your social circumstance and whether or not that unit of measurement is recognized, right, and what that term sort of connotes where you are. But like the point here is not that kilogram is independent of perception. The point is that the value that kilogram is meant to represent, that is persistent beyond one human being's experience, which I think is fair.
Materialists argue that human ideas are just a reflection of the outside material world inside our minds. An important concept in dialectical materialism is that matter is constantly changing. Matter is defined by motion. All matter that has ever been observed is in a state of motion and changes over time. Even a rock that seems to be motionless is actually moving and changing. The molecules inside a rock are moving, and the rock is on Earth, which is spinning and moving through space. Millions of years ago, the rock was molten lava, and in a billion years, the rock wouldn't look like it does now. It will continue to change, even if right now that change is so slow that it's imperceptible. Okay, so now we understand matter. So let's find out, what is consciousness? Consciousness or ideas is the way we see the world and understand the world. Consciousness is the version of the world in...
Okay, hang on a sec. I want to rewind here. There's something that stuck out to me.
So let's find out, what is consciousness? Consciousness or ideas.
Consciousness or ideas. That can't be right. Consciousness is not equivocal with ideas, right? In any of these thinkers, that seems very strange.
Not generally, no. But this is actually not a strange equivocation, particularly in German philosophy at the time, mainly because what consciousness was meant as was knowledge. So consciousness and knowledge were considered to be the same thing, and this comes straight out of Hegel. In phenomenology spirit, consciousness is the structure of knowledge itself. So, you know,
well,
to say consciousness or
ideas... If I may, I mean, consciousness, or I guess, and correct me on this use of language, but true consciousness is sort of like an elevator word for a certain kind of what's the word you want to use? Like a certain kind of thing that we sort of conceive of as consciousness, like an awareness or the thing that sort of like attends your experience when you feel you are aware of a thing. It becomes consciousness when it is of an actual thing, and therefore it's like you're conscious of a thing in the world, and it is then identifiable with knowledge insofar as knowledge is consciousness of a thing. But like we can have ideas that don't follow that at all. We can have ideas of things that are sort of chimerical and fantastical and untrue, or have ideas of ideas even maybe. What do you think of that? Am I completely off base here, or this just it strikes me as very strange?
I see the distinction you're making, but it's not a distinction that is necessarily as distinct as you think it is, particularly in this context. And I don't think she's speaking it from the context of Hegel, but from what follows from Hegel, ideas are just highly, highly advanced mediated forms of consciousness in one way, if you look at it. So consciousness is the structure and form of knowing, and to be conscious is to be conscious of something, and to be conscious of something is to have a structural relationship of knowing to it, whatever that may be. As poor or as advanced as that may be. So, yeah, it's not exact what she's saying, but it's not terribly off base. It's not unintelligible either.
Okay, fair enough. Rare Ellis says one could say all empiricism is limited by the boundaries of our five senses, which determine the boundaries of such investigation. Jelma Bayorn says, in a way, though, it depends on how finicky you want to be. The thing that exists outside of a particular measurement is quote-unquote cut out of reality and signified via the measurement. Okay. I'm going to have to return to, I just have to read more. There's too much to bloody read.
It's the way we see the world and understand the world. Consciousness is the version of the world inside your mind. The world that you think you know is just a reflection of the real world that we are living in.
And we went over this one, and we had some strong opinions on this sentence. The world that you know, that you think you know, is just a reflection of the real world that we are living. Again, I don't like this distinction between the real world and the world that you think you know.
Well, this is what you said. Like, this is the crude empiricism.
Yeah.
Just a simple reflective theory.
Yeah. There is like it's basically like in Peircean language. It's basically just the observation that, well, I guess this is Descartes really. It's just the observation that other people view the world differently from us, and sometimes our views of the world are non-efficacious. Therefore, there must be something outside of our immediate perception, or outside of our consciousness on that way of understanding consciousness, than what we see. And there's just nothing distinctive here, so we're not really characterizing anything that nobody is doing.
Imagine this. Your eyes and your sensations work as a projector. It records the meta world, then sends the images, the information into your brain, and based on those images and information, your brain builds consciousness about the world. The reflection of the world varies in each person's mind. For example, for people who were born blind or deaf, their consciousness about the world is very different from people who don't have the same conditions. Blind people can't see, so their world has no color. Deaf people can't hear, so their world doesn't have a sound. So it means even though we share one same material world, each of us have a different consciousness about the world. So what creates consciousness? Marx and Engels argued for the social origin of consciousness. Marx believed that consciousness emerged from social activities, specifically language and labor. Basically, Marx believed that we develop consciousness from interacting with each other and from interacting with our environment. Language evolved for humans to exchange thoughts, and our thoughts are rooted in language. So, language was an important development for human consciousness. Labor was also an important development for human consciousness. Marx defines labor as the process by which humans impact the material world and change it. When we make products or build buildings or do anything to improve our lives by interacting with the material world, we are performing labor. Labor changes the human body and also changes the material world around us. For example, thousands of years ago, a group of humans in Africa found an edible kind of grass. They wanted to have more, so they planted the seeds from that grass. That was how rice made. And now, rice is the most essential food in the world. Over many, many years, humans trained our physical activity to become rice growers, and the physical conditions of growing rice changed our minds and the ways we think about the world. Labor helps humans build muscle. It makes us stronger. Labor helps us change a piece of white land into a farm to grow food. And from that labor, humans have knowledge about how to grow food, like rice, and share that knowledge widely with other people. That is how consciousness is built.
I don't like this. Like there's a grain of truth here in terms of like, yeah, our metabolism of the world by whatever means, has a direct, a direct productive relationship with how we organize socially, which of course has a direct relationship with like, what kinds of life we are accustomed to, because of course like our social organization involves how we sleep, how we eat, how we converse with other people, how we work, how our day is structured, where we and in what kinds of ways we live and dwell in the world. This is just the basic Rousseauian point, but there's something else going on here when we're talking about consciousness. When Marx et al. Are talking about consciousness, they're talking about an awareness of oneself as part of an extrinsic greater entity, like of a class or something, or in Hegelian terms of a state, if you will. That's labor by itself is not productive of consciousness. There are other elements there. And so while I don't think this is necessarily wrong in and of itself, it's inherently impoverished and misleading, because we don't just magically become conscious in like this vulgar sense, because she's not distinguishing between class consciousness or community consciousness and consciousness simply as like your qualitative experience of the world. She even if she doesn't intend to, like the way she's depicting this is kind of meshing these together.
I have a bit of a disagreement with you here. I do agree in the sense that she's saying things in a maybe not the best way, but the overall point and some of it is incredibly salient and I think pretty accurate. Now again, Antonio, feel free to tell me I'm an asshole anytime. When we're talking about, let's take a rice farmer and the consciousness, the experience, the consciousness is going to be a shit word for me. Let's talk about the subjectivity of the rice farmer. Prefer the subjectivity. The reason a rice farmer has their particular subjectivity is it's produced through the labor that has happened, not just for them, but the people around them. The reason that their valley has been turned into giant rice paddies is a combination of, one, the labor, obviously, to make those, but by nature, the labor of having to produce said rice, said houses, said clothing, said everything. The labor is what produces the entire social strata of where the rice farmer lives. Labor is the base of that. Said very awkwardly here, it's not wrong. Pick a child out from an inner city school or a suburban school or a wealthy school. Their reality comes from the labor that is not just around them, that they partake in. Their subjectivity is created by said labor of said parents and the labor that is around them. Labor produces the social strata, which in turn gets organized. The organization, in the capitalist sense, creates class structures, but labor doesn't directly create class structures. It produces the subject and the consciousness, as she calls it here.
I'm going to push back a little bit. It does produce the subject, but you can produce the subject in that way such that they have no awareness of themselves as a part of a class that is, say, exploited by another class, or even of society as being broken down into things like classes. Like you can be embedded in such a situation as you think that this is simply your God-given lot in life like everybody else, and you are simply, it's not even a matter of you have like a scheme explaining the entire social reality around you that doesn't invoke class. You may simply not even think that way, because for whatever reason you have no impetus to. And so you can be entirely socially constructed, your entire world be the product of labor relations and all of that stuff, but you can completely lack consciousness. And I think that's the distinction that I'd be looking for here. I mean, I take your point. I think you're 100% correct, except that I don't think that this actually is adequate to account for consciousness beyond, of course, like a consciousness as a description of the experience of an individual simplicator. I think there's something else there. I think when we're talking about consciousness in this mode, like especially in the context of dialectical materialism, we're talking about consciousness of oneself as a part of something, specifically.
If I could say something about that.
Please, yes, of course.
Yeah, please.
I would just say that it seems to me that the distinction between you two is that one of you is talking, Brooks is talking about labor as just the generative category, which is the explanation of all things for Marx. And you, President Sunday, are talking about it in a more individual, concrete sense of an already established system. And those are two different but related vantage points. And I think you're both right, depending on the concreteness of what we're talking about.
That's a
No,
cop-out.
probably fair. I would even say the awkwardness here is the word consciousness and how she's talking about it, because again, this is not something Marx doesn't like have a book on, hey, so what's consciousness like? And specifically her use here, and the reason I tend to use the word subjectivity here, is she's going to go on to talk about consciousness. She's already said the way that you see the world in your mind, but she's going to go on to basically say it is the representation, the mirror representation of said world. And as such, that's something that's deeply produced within sort of traditional Marx and sense and other philosophers too. But that's why I'm aiming that way. I get what you're saying. There is a lot more. I'm not an orthodox Marxist myself. I'm just trying to steelman our argument and kind of say this isn't far off from kind of how I understand the thing.
And I wouldn't disagree with you there. I just think there's a step missing, and I think the danger that I see is by making this the explanation of how consciousness is built by itself and just ending it there, you're kind of eliding like that other thing that's so particular to Marx and people following him, like the emergence of consciousness beyond simply the emergence of a conscious subject, like just meant in a general sense, as in like a consciousness-bearing subject. That's a major component, at least as I read it. So it needed to go farther. Like, I don't disagree with you. Like, this isn't wrong. It's just very incomplete.
So, consciousness comes from interaction with other human beings and with our environment. Now we understand matter and we understand consciousness. So, what's the relationship between the two? Well, matter and consciousness have a dialectical relationship. What the hell is dialectical relationship? Well, now we are finally getting ready to learn about how to see the world through the lens of dialectical materialism. Dialectical relationships are relationships where things mutually impact each other. According to dialectical materialism, all motion and all change is the result of dialectical relationships. Everything is constantly being affected by and affecting things at the same time. If one car crashes into another car, that's a dialectical relationship. If I drop a brick on the ground from the top of a building, the brick will leave an impression on the ground, and the brick will also be broken by the ground. Mutual impact, dialectical relationship.
See, I and you guys can, I invite you to challenge me on this, but this strikes me as simply an event involving multiple elements, which of course I think all events do, but not necessarily a dialectical relationship, because again, the dialectical relationship would be something that persists in time. It's not a simple one-off event. We'd be talking about instead like a movement that is produced by an event, perhaps, but then is produced anew by further events and changes over time, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about dialectic. Like, and the analogy that I used when we talked earlier was like, think of like philosophy, where you have individual people who are engaged in conversations and debating with each other and encountering new books and whatnot, and there is this conversation, like the individual participants in it all die. They're all gone, and the conversation itself goes from place to place. There are Arabic philosophers, there are Chinese philosophers, like all over the world, and they're all more or less gone to us, but the conversation still persists. It's the relationship itself sort of abstracted away from its participants that has its own continuous life. That is the dialectic we're talking about. And similarly with like historical materialism, we're talking about the emergence of like the evolution of social forms. We're not talking about the evolution of one city. We're talking about the evolution of the forms of relationship itself that outlives and lives entirely, in a certain sense, apart from any particular instantiation of them. There is a continuity between like an ancient Greek polis and a modern state, but we don't have like ancient Greek polii still relating to each other, simply having grown in size to become modern states. Instead, we have the relationship itself entirely apart from any particular community. That is what has persisted. Same with philosophy. And I think simply characterizing it as, well, we have two elements that impact one another in a moment, that's a part of it, to be sure, but that's not sufficient. That's not a dialectical relationship. That's simply an event involving two objects. And in fact, especially with the case of the brick, that relationship has ended. There's a little bit of a dialectic in an instantaneous moment where they cause collateral damage on each other, the brick and the pavement, but then it ends. And so they cease to be in a dialectical relationship past that point, because these are just dead items that no longer move, and the course of events that they have set in motion was short-lived and over now. You see?
Yeah, I would say that the main problem that comes out of these interpretations is conflation between dialectics and relationship as such. What they mean by dialectic is just relationship. That's really it.
Which, even then, though, that's a bit of a problem, because the relationships that they are describing are dead by the time they're describing them, like a car accident.
But even in this, the example given, that a dialectic, I'm even very hesitant to say is two-sided. It's complex relationships are intended to be somewhat systemic, to be discussed as systemic. And you may refer one thing against another, but to use an example that's one thing against another, that's a dialectic relationship. It seems to biunivocalize what we don't necessarily want to in that, and solidify it simply. A dialectics is not find two things and then the result.
Match them together, yeah. Maybe and this language is kind of loaded and probably bad, but with a dualistic relationship be more appropriate here. We're just talking again about the interaction between two elements in a moment. And I don't know, it seems to be the dialectical part, the dialectical relationship is almost redundant in a way, because we're talking specifically about the relationship abstracted away from the things that are participating in the relationship having its own existence. And as you say, it describes things that are systemic. We're not talking about events, we're talking about events that are productive of other events that are productive of other events, and there's a chain. There's an organic growth from the initial event that you can actually track apart from the things that initially catalyzed the initial event.
Again, she's overstating a simple thing. She was taught this very simple thing, that a dialectic relationship, as she says here, is one where two sides have mutual impact, which is not wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I'd stop.
Yeah, it's not wrong, but that's the start at best. You need to. There's more.
So it is very important for you to understand that matter and consciousness have a dialectical relationship. Matter defines consciousness, and consciousness can impact matter through human activity. Let me explain how matter defines consciousness. As you know, the real world has been existing for billions of years, and humans just came to exist on this world about 200,000 years ago. So it's obvious that matter appeared first, and human consciousness appeared much later. I said earlier in this video that consciousness is the reflection of the real world inside human mind. So it means when matter changes, consciousness also changes accordingly. For example, you're driving on a highway. Suddenly you see a big rock in the middle of the road. What do? Well, if you don't want to have an accident, you have to turn the steering wheel to avoid that rock, right? So in this example, the rock, the matter, appears and it changes your consciousness, your thoughts when you were driving.
And see, we take this and we go back to when we were talking about the emergence of consciousness. See, she's talking about consciousness as something that doesn't actually require a social context to produce, because human beings in isolation can, again, engage in avoidance behaviors, say with learned dangers in their environment, or they can pick out items that are good for food or whatever. That's not a thing that is the specific ways in which we do can absolutely be produced socially, but what she's talking about here appears to just be simple awareness of your surroundings in whatever form, and we aren't actually dependent on society for that. A baby on a desert island presuming it lives past infancy, would still engage with the environment. It's just we're just being so in particular.
Well, no. But the example here also does a second thing that I think is where I find issue with it is it presumes two things with consciousness. It presumes that it is both anticipatory and has agency, that the way that the material world affects consciousness is by a consciousness that reacts to it and knowingly changes. When I'm driving down the road, that's a really terrible. A better example would be if every day I wake up and the shoes that I put on, because it's all I can afford, have on the slight right outside a little rock that's embedded and it's sharp. It's sharp enough that it annoys me, but not enough to take out. And every day I walk, but I lean a little bit less. Over time, I just naturally lean slightly different in my shoes. This is the type of production of consciousness that we're talking about. It's emergent and not like anticipatory and reactive. The human mind didn't react to rice by going, excellent, time to build giant vast fields in the future. Like, that's not what at all the earlier thing was talking about.
Yeah.
But does that mean consciousness cannot change matter at all? Well, for one thing, your thoughts are what tell your hands to turn the steering wheel to change the direction of the car. So obviously, thoughts can affect the material world. In many Hollywood superhero movies such as X-Men or Superman, some people can move things just by using their thoughts. But unluckily, I don't have magic or superpower, so I cannot move this bottle from my right hand to my left hand just by my thought, no matter how long I look at it. Move. But if I order my left hand to grab the bottle from my right hand with my thoughts, voila, now I have what I wanted.
I don't like this either. Like, again, like we don't move our appendages with our thoughts. Like, we move them with our brains in a sense. Like our brains send signals that cause like the movement of your limbs to do things, and there are like relationships of things inside of your head that conduce to where those end up moving. But we don't think, okay, hand, grab the glass, well done. No, we don't do that. It's like just as we don't like plan out our thoughts with our thoughts, we can't do that in like a limited sense, and like when we think about things, but like we don't pick out which thoughts we will have consciously. It's like similarly, we when we're using our bodies, we can think about it, but we don't. It's not our thoughts that move them. It's something a little bit different. And there's a flattening of all of these things.
Okay, so what does that mean? It means thoughts cannot directly change matter, but it can impact matter by human activities. Because matter defines our ideas, so the most important rule of dialectical materialism is this. In order to succeed, all human ideas and activities should be based on material reality. Marx used the term material conditions to describe all the material things and processes around us. So when Marx talks about material conditions, he's just talking about the real world that we are living in.
I don't think this is true. I don't think this is like distinct to Marx. Everyone's talking about the quote-unquote real world that we're living in. What Marx is talking about is like the specific mode of production as like the governing element.
I mean, again, though, Marx is this is definitely not Marx in the sense that this is such a loop. Our material world produces us, and our thoughts and our actions.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But also our actions produce the real world, which then produce our so where does it start? Like, yeah, where does it start? Where does it end? How do we do things? It's
frustrating because no. That's a good point. I don't know why I didn't catch on to that. I've sort of had like a vague sense of that. I just didn't want to go too far into it because it just seems irrelevant. But the point is not irrelevant. Like vis-a-vis this video, why is she taking time with this? Like this is really heady stuff that's well beyond my competence, well beyond her competence. Why not just explicate a specifically Marxian view, or at the very least, like, cite carefully whatever this weird chimerical thing is apparently downstream from Lenin et al. That she's getting from her textbook. I don't know why she's going on this tangent.
For example, I want to own my own house, but I don't have enough money to buy a house. So based on my material conditions of not having any money, I can't buy a house.
Yeah, so this is really frustrating because material conditions in Marx does not refer to what you as an individual have as a repository of resources. It's around what is society oriented. How do we extract calories from the world? How do we distribute them? Like things like that. Like how do we relate to each other in terms of how do we get each other to do the labor necessary to do those things? Those are material conditions. Bob not having enough money to buy a bike is not material conditions. I mean, they are conditions that are material in a vulgar sense, but it's just irrelevant to anything that Marx is saying.
If I want to own a house, I will have to make a plan that is based on my current material conditions. A plan of making more money that is realistic, that makes sense for the environment I live in. Or I will have to give up my dream of owning a house and come up with a new dream that matches my current material conditions.
And here's, I said something rather good earlier that I'm going to repeat here, and you can just shatter my hopes and dreams by telling me it doesn't work. The material conditions aren't a thing you consider when evaluating your hopes and dreams. Your material conditions are the things that constrain what you are able to dream of, because your material conditions anchor from what in the world you are trained to expect the things you need to live. And therefore, what you dream up as a better situation in the future will be downstream from that. How can I make this thing better? Or how can I escape even the need of this thing, material or whatever like that? It has nothing to do with can I improve my personal material conditions such that I can buy a house? I mean, that's certainly a calculation one would make. Again, downstream from having their dreams being produced by certain modes of production and exchange, but the material conditions are specifically brought in as that which determines the scope of our imagination in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Yeah, the thesis of base and superstructure.
Yeah, exactly. I meant that. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
Like
Spot
buying a
on.
house in The Sims. Another example of basing our actions and strategies on our material conditions is Vietnam in 1945.
I just brought these people on to validate me. I don't know anything I'm saying.
At that time, our Communist Party wanted to have a communist revolution. But Ho Chi Minh knew that many Vietnamese people could not have the time and energy to learn what Marxism was to support this revolution because millions of us were starving to death. Seriously, when you don't even know whether you're gonna have food to eat tonight or not, will you want to spend time on learning about someone's ideology? Based on that fact, Ho Chi Minh decided that the very first plan for the revolution was to get people food. And we did it. They attacked the stores of the Japanese army, stole rice, and distributed it to poor people. Millions of starving people at that time suddenly saw that communism gave them food, so they decided to follow communism without even knowing what it actually meant. That is just one small example about how our revolution succeeded. Remember this, all your decisions, plans, or strategies have to correspond with the material conditions, the reality.
Yes, but the point here is that they will. Not that they have to, because you won't succeed if you don't make them correspond with the material conditions. Now, I mean, that language is used, of course, when people are developing theory and criticizing it. But that's done from a third-person vantage, typically. Your plans and strategies are always not just constrained by, but produced by the material conditions, because they're going to concern, again, those material conditions, like in the case of the Vietnamese Revolution. The things that they are stealing and the things from which they steal, those are downstream again from modes of production. They're stealing the things that they have been conditioned materially to need, or that have become through like an historical process the things around which all of the stakes are oriented.
Such as now we can see that in many countries in the world, people are dying because of COVID-19 and racism and police brutality. So we as revolutionists, what do? How can we persuade more people to join our ideology, then fight with us for our revolution? It's obvious that we have to help them solve their problems first, so they can see, wow, these people really helped me. They really understood my material conditions, so I guess I will support the revolution now. That's how we get people to our side.
Okay, but she's just describing. She is describing an approach to propaganda to to people who are, for whatever reason, unable to understand like heady theoretical concepts. But she's also deploying that same strategy in trying to explain these heady theoretical concepts to us through this video. So I'm a little bit frustrated here because that doesn't actually help. That makes the whole thing extremely vulnerable to specious criticism on the grounds that this presentation was bad. There's not a whole lot else to say besides that. It's
Who we care about what
I think
Marxism...
there's a little bit more to say.
Please.
I think it's a little, I don't know, burying the lead, privileging the idea, whatever you want to call it. The idea that the poor in northern and southern Vietnam at various times that Ho Chi Minh helped and supported by giving them food suddenly went, yes, communism sounds wonderful. The speeches Ho Chi Minh gave were empowering and beautiful and amazing, but it wasn't married with necessarily a communist ideology. There's a significant amount of nationalism in there. Ho Chi Minh famously saying that, what was the line he was told by Churchill or someone? I've got 2 chairs here. Oh, it was Stalin. 2 chairs. This chair is for those who care about their country. This chair is for those who care about the world. The implication, nationalist or communist. And he said, I sit in both chairs. Which it's a fable, but a good one. The way Mao won, he didn't convince people of communism right away. He took care of people who were destitute. And like they just took care of people. Like it's like the Little Red Book has all of this in there. This is not some unusual stuff. But I'm hesitant to say it's like they went, oh yeah, communism, cool, that's good, let's do that. I'm in that ideology now.
No, they went, let's support the people who are making us able to eat, and it was that simple. Well, yeah.
Actually means when they are coughing to death or being shot and beaten to death by police and white supremacists. We, Marxists and Leninists, have to prove to them that we are on their side by our own actions, real effective actions. Let's do things step by step, from easy targets to more difficult targets like Vietnam did. First, we stole rice to feed people. Second, we stole weapons to arm people. Third, we shut down the factories to paralyze the production system of our enemies. And then the real revolution started. That's a simplification, of course, but it shows the pattern of building a plan and proceeding based on material conditions.
And this is really where the poverty of this conception of material conditions comes in, because everybody does this. She's just talking about you have to engage with the stuff that exists and matters in the world in order for a plan to succeed. And like, duh, like a fascist would do this. Material conditions doesn't refer to this in Marxist theory. It refers to, again, like the specific social modes of production such that certain kinds of interventions or any kind of intervention like a deliberate attempt to foment a revolution even makes sense. Sorry, Antonio, I cut you off.
What I would add to that is, yes, apparently everybody's been doing dialectical materialism forever, every time state power turns hands. But there's also the sense in which these people are seriously mistaken, and this is partly a problem of presentation, and which is the fault of everybody's, in which they think the revolution is the grasping of state or social material power, and it's not. That's just barely the beginning of the revolution. You know, the revolution is the actual creation of the new material conditions, which will create a new consciousness, and so on. and to change it into like, oh, revolution is us getting the people on our side and taking over state power. Well, no, that's not really it.
Yeah, that's just an insurrection, and in fact, of course, like that can fail, meaning it's not really a revolution in fact, because the whole point of a revolution is it's an irrevocable move. This is why Marx is so critical of like, for example, the French revolutionists in the Brumaires. Like they failed because they were repeating the poetry of the previous generation. They could only imagine a recreation of the present with different people filling the same slots. So it's like first as tragedy, then as farce. That's exactly what that is. You're just recreating the thing comically that you were ostensibly trying to escape from.
No, it's the Zizek line I love, which is excellent. You've had your revolution. Now what? Like that's as a line.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, Sunday. Thank you for the invite to the stream, but I think I'm gonna head out now.
Oh, that's all right. Thank you very much for participating. You have a good night. It's very late where you are, isn't it? Because you thought it was 6:30.
No, it's actually still early.
Oh yeah.
No, it's still early. It's 9 p.m.
That's late enough. I'd say it's late enough. Anyways, thank you very much, Antonio.
See you around.
Welcome. Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. It's been a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you.
And Brooks, don't feel like you need to stick around either.
I'm doing work as I listen.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. Jay Grimes, thank you for the $10. Is it perhaps a problem that the Communist Party educates the lower classes on the nature of Marxism and communism and disseminates it as if they are still in a wartime context? I don't know which Communist Party he's talking about, but that actually does kind of make sense. Like the insistence that there are these immediate practical goals of trying to proselytize to, again, like a movement of workers. It probably like tends you towards like the lowest common denominator in terms of accessible at the expense of correct interpretations of these concepts. And as people become more and more educated, that's a problem, because now these simplified concepts start to bleed upwards into the academy and into like the rhetoric of people who are in a position where they should be knowing better and dealing at a higher level with these things. I think that's a fair point, Jay Grimes. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Brooks, or shall we continue?
No, have fun.
All right, we all now have basic ideas about dialectical materialism. There's another important question: how to apply dialectical materialism in daily life. The way we apply dialectical materialism in real life is called materialist dialectics.
I don't know what this distinction means, but I just don't know what this distinction means. Because we don't apply dialectical materialism in real life. We analyze history through the lens of dialectical materialism.
But you apply materialist dialectics. Because I see I moved the words.
Oh, I see. You're joking. Got it. Okay. So we're actually this actually makes no sense. All right, cool. Let's move on.
Materialist dialectics, in a very simple definition, means having arguments and judgments based on facts.
Okay, but okay, so you're just saying your arguments are super duper then. That's not distinguishing anything. Everybody says their arguments are based on facts. The question is, what are the relevant facts that make an argument productive? Like the advantage of dialectical materialism as a frame of reference for understanding history is that like it actually is a productive theory. You can actually understand in a concrete and fairly like in a way that appears to track the data that we have fairly closely, what specific elements in history are responsible for the ongoing developmental process that we see, like the increased complexity and the change in labor relations and in how we produce and distribute resources. Like that's we're not. It can't simply refer to arguing in a way that refers to the real world, because everybody does this. We would have just been doing this forever.
To use this materialist dialectics in real life, there are two principles that we have to remember. The first principle is understanding things from a comprehensive viewpoint. Lenin said, if we want to really understand a thing, we need to see the whole of it, examine the whole of it, and all the direct and indirect connections that it has with other objects, phenomena, or process. It means when we try to understand a thing, we have to comprehensively see it in all aspects. The more complicated the thing is, the more aspects you have to investigate. For example, you're looking at this bottle of drink. Can you tell if the water inside is sweet or salty by just looking at it without any labels or brand names? No, you can't. You have to investigate first. I will investigate now by having a taste of it. Then I will have the right answer. I hope that my investigation doesn't conclude that this is poison. Well, here goes. Well, it's actually sweet and a little bit salty, and so far as at least it doesn't seem to be poisonous. So you see, we can't have the right answer about the taste of the water inside this bottle until we actually drink it, or until someone you trust who actually tasted it tells you the answer, like what I just did.
Hi, I'm American Johnson.
Okay, so like...
I have so many issues here.
I do too. Do you want to go first?
This is the anti-vax argument from a different direction, and I know she's not necessarily that, and I'm not aspersions, whatever, but the logical reality that these people operate by when you say it's only my experience or that experience of someone else I know that I trust anything puts us in a difficult situation when we're having discussions about larger things that none of us can directly perceive, climate change, pollution, etc. Becomes problematic.
Yeah, and in addition, like let's now apply this to like the concept of revolution or of history or whatever. She can't mean to say seriously that you need to actually live through every possible permutation of a social situation in order to understand which one is good or which ones are bad, or their role in history. Like it can't be the case that we just have to replicate all of human history for ourselves in order to make statements about history. Like, we don't approach anything in that way. Marx certainly didn't. Like, the beginning of that statement where she was going on about how, like, we need to analyze things from all sides. Great. That's good. We need to understand, like, the ideological or the philosophical content of, if you will, of a community, not by itself, as if it's simply productive of social relations, like the West simply just was so smart because of all the fish oil they consumed in Greece that they just had this brilliant idea to invent democracy and science and whatnot. No, you think of that as being produced by the material conditions, the things that they the things they relied upon to live, and how they related to each other to acquire it and exchange it and all that stuff. And you have like a bidirectional relationship there where the one produces the other. Like that would be like a two-sided analysis where you're paying attention to that, as opposed to just like saying that like ideas are the mover of history, or simply that economics is the driver of history, as you see in like a lot of liberal political economy. Like, I don't have an issue with that per se, but then she goes on to, again, like, situate all of this just within the perspective of a single individual trying to Sherlock Holmes, like, the state of a room or the contents of a bottle. Everybody does this. This grants zero unique content, or zero specific content to dialectical materialism to distinguish it from literally every other approach, because we're all doing the same thing at some level. She just seems to be saying like, hey, we're being smart, and people who don't do dialectical materialism, they just drink bottles that they find lying around. And I guess to an extent they sort of do, but so is she. So it's not really helping.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, no. Look, the idea. If we just go back to the bottle, I tend towards more the Deleuze thing. You're aware of that, but the idea that her desire to drink that bottle is because she's doing an investigation, and everyone is like, this is that, or it. All of it is a post hoc justification for the reality of doing the thing. She even says, "Oh, it's what I wanted" at one point, which I kind of chuckled at. There's a underlying thing here where she's utilizing this in order to justify beliefs after the fact. And that's the challenge when you start going into that, when you start utilizing whatever dogmatic method you may have to justify things that you found, or that you want things to be true, or that you've decided you have this ideology, which we all do. The joke of ideology is if you don't see one, it's yours, that you're justifying post hoc. And this post hoc justification is what she's talking about when you go through the process of, oh no, it's you get to find out or trust someone or find someone you trust. You'd be surprised how often people will find someone who they trust who just happens to agree with them.
Yeah, exactly. Well put. I wasn't entirely sure where you were going with the anti-vax thing before, because of course, like, we all do certain stuff like that. But that's actually a very, very eloquently put point.
Here to share with you a story about investigation and why it matters for you.
Dialectical materialism, by the way, has just nothing to do with investigation. Like, nothing. It is an investigation in and of itself.
If we were to spend time talking about why is she holding a bottle of plastic, salty, sweet liquid? I'm doing my best here. I'm on the internet. Why is she holding that? Why is she doing this in front of a camera? Why are we sitting here?
Brooks, hang on. She explained that. She used her thoughts to move her arm to pick up the bottle, yeah.
But my point is, like, why are we all doing this? Yes, we can have, like, we can examine these conditions that put us in this and drive us to doing these activities and thinking that what we're doing matters, or the way that our labor is producing money for YouTube as we're even doing this. Like, yeah, there's something there, but not, why did I drink? Is this bottle poison? I'm going to find out.
Indeed. If I have to watch this one more time, I may very well.
This story just makes me sad.
It does.
This story just makes me sad. This story he's about to tell just makes me sad.
I wish... I don't know. This whole, like, scenario makes me feel bad. Like, they seem like nice enough people, and I don't...
They are. They're incredibly kind. I've watched their streams. They're... Look,
I like Luna. I've seen her. Like, I was 100% on her side in the Destiny thing. Like, she's been treated terribly, and I think she's a pretty decent person. It's just... They don't know what they're talking about here. It's not their fault they know what they're talking about here, but just like, why are you doing this? Why are you engaging in fights with these giants on this platform and just like feeding yourself to the wolves?
Well, and why is Vosh being an ass? And I say that they're all, to me...
No, I agree.
They're all brothers and sisters. They are... I call my brother an asshole. Doesn't mean he's not someone I care about. I care. All you people are brothers and sisters. The challenge I have is when we start not thinking so, or when we start acting like we aren't part of some larger mission or machine. I was making this joke that, like, we need to aim Vosh correctly. Like, he's at his best when he's nailing people who are actually hard reactionaries. Like, none of these people are that. The people we're talking about here, they're genuine. They're not studied, or they haven't really spent the time, or they're just trying to do this type of semi-activism, or they're touching into different points. They're not harming the movement or some silliness like that in a meaningful sense. They've got more work to do. We all fucking do. But why can't it be a learning experience?
Well, I mean,
why can't it be?
Yeah, exactly. Well, case in point, like, the only person who really attacked this video, as far as I can ascertain, was Vosh, and then other people after that. Like, this is not being picked up by, like, the enemies of the revolution. This is just like a fairly, underdeveloped take by somebody who was just using some significantly impoverished sources. I was annoyed here when I saw, like, Hakeem was endorsing this. It's like, come on, really? It's a fantastic video. I'm looking forward to the next installments. But, like the worst case scenario is, like, someone like you and me go, oh, like, really? Like, come on, like, let's have some standards here. But, like, realistically, nobody's mind was changed for the worst by this at all. But, like, having that invidious infighting between, like, giant, somewhat ethically sus in a lot of ways, entertainer who's vaguely lefty, and these nice people who are kind of, like, wishy-washy in their theory, and turning this into a bloodbath where they just destroy each other's reputations. That doesn't help. That actually damages, like, the optics and the ability of left wingers in general to sell their positions, because it makes us all look terrible.
It hardens us. It makes us have to pick sides. I don't pick sides. I think Vosh is a useful lefty, and I think he's part of the movement. I don't think he's a evil reactionary like some people. I think he can be a shithead, but I think so can I.
Well, and to be fair, like, I mean, they aren't exactly clean in this. Like, I haven't watched the debate yet, but I've heard that they've gone like for the pedo angle.
No, they went really hard after this, and I think they kind of proved, like, again, my point, and this is the challenge with all of this, is it's easy for any of us to go in that hard, hypercritical direction where we start destroying each other in the interest of either clout or self-entertainment or ego stroking or whatever it may be. But as that reaction happens, there's only really one way to react to that, and that's to defend yourself. And it's sad, because I almost want to say there's a great moment in the Boondocks. It's one of my favorite cartoons. Martin Luther King comes back, and everyone loves him. Everyone thinks he's great. Turns out he was just in a coma for a long time. And he says, 9/11 happens, and he goes, I think we should be good Christians and turn the other cheek. And the world turns on him and hates him. This response we naturally have, reaction, as if there's a political movement associated, to just go against, I think is it's deeply harmful and decidedly not leftist by anyone's standard.
Yeah. Oh, Jay Grimes, thank you for the $5. Sorry, I missed the point. So you were just elaborating that you understand this is a problem, the treatment of, teaching Marxism as if it's being disseminated in a wartime context. This is a problem endemic to most communist parties. Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know. We'll finish this section. That's just I agree. It's just sad. Like
it's just sad.
You're just seeing like this person's like childhood memory or whatever being just brought up for the pigs to gnaw to bits.
So when I was a kid, my dad liked to drink...
Not referring to anyone in particular by that remark, to be clear.
...beer a lot, and we would go on road trips, and he would pour beer into, like, a soda can. And then I would be a little kid in the back seat, and I would...
This just makes me so sad.
The Coke can, and I'd say, oh boy, I'm going to drink this Coca-Cola now, and I'd start drinking it, and then realize that it was beer, and my child's tongue rejected it in disgust, and I spit it out, and I said, Dad, why did you put beer in this Coke can? And he said, so the police don't see me drinking a beer while I'm driving. Don't do this, by the way. This is very illegal and irresponsible. But that's what my dad did back in the 90s. And it was an important lesson to me that we should always investigate things. I should have at least done a sniff test of the Coca-Cola before drinking. So the moral of this story, besides don't drink and drive, which you should never do, is don't just trust appearances.
Okay, so the dialectical materialism is like that 90s commercial. It's like, don't you put it in your mouth. That's dialectical materialism. That's what we're getting from this.
Investigate fully and deeply from every angle. And don't judge a book dialectically by its cover alone. And by book, I mean beverage. And by cover, I mean can. Because you never know when your dad is drinking and driving and he poured a beer into a Coke can.
Jesus Christ.
Just ask yourself, like, what does the word dialectic actually add to that sentence? Nothing. I
just find the story so, like, intensely powerful. Not in the way he intended. Later, she's going to describe how he once was a libertarian and very capitalist, focused on individual rights and all of that. And as a white kid who grew up in the Midwest, I have a lot of friends who have stories like that, and we are produced. So it is almost an example of the materialist conditions producing subjectivity, but I don't think in the way that they meant it. It's such a sad story.
I mean, I'd like to think it was just like a quirky bad moment that's like sus for everybody else, but they otherwise had a happy relationship and things were fine. But you know, I agree with you. It's like,
If your dad's hiding beer in Coke cans and you accidentally drink it while he's driving, there's no other.
I'm a sensitive soul. I'm trying to sanitize this for the sake of my emotional well-being.
I remember that one Tuesday. That's not.
Yeah. All right, let's watch the silly Vietnamese people with the hairy moles try to feel an elephant.
Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time,
I'm assuming
there
they're
were
Vietnamese.
5 blind fortune tellers. They were all friends, and one day they heard
Wait.
that a circus
There's no elephants in Vietnam. No, they can't be Vietnamese. There's strange people with sunglasses.
is coming to their town, and they bring an elephant. All 5 fortune tellers are very excited because all of them never met an elephant before. So when the circus came, they gave the guy who takes care of that elephant some money, and he will allow them to touch the elephant. The first fortune teller touches the nose, the second one touches the ivory, the third one touches the leg, the fourth one touches the ear, and the last one touches the tail. After touching really carefully, they all came up with their conclusion. The first fortune teller said, I thought the elephant was very special, but it's just like a big leech. The second one said, I don't think it's like a leech at all. I think it's like a big hard wooden stick. The third one said, No, it feels like a big hand fan. The fourth one, You're all wrong. I touched it, and it feels exactly like a wooden column. The last fortune teller said, All 4 of you are wrong. I felt one side which is very furry. It's exactly like a broom. All 5 fortune tellers don't agree with each other because each of them have their own evidence that they believe. Then they argue and beat each other up. The end of the story. So what's the lesson from this story? The lesson is, before making any conclusion or judgment, we have to check and see all the aspects of a thing or a problem. Lack of knowledge will bring divine thoughts and wrong conclusions. And to me, there's also another lesson. There are always people who don't know what they are talking about, but always act like they know the best. Don't be one of them, okay?
Okay.
Real quick, just so you know, Vietnam totally does have elements. There's not a lot of them, but Southeast Asia's had them for a long time.
Really?
They're in danger, but they exist. Oh yeah.
Interesting.
If you've ever been to Southeast Asia, at some point, if you go backpacking, you will run into someone who wants you to pay to ride an elephant, and don't do it for reasons I can tell you that are depressing and sad about the rest of the story.
To my great regret, I've actually never left Canada. So, Canada's big in my defense, but
Seeing things comprehensively is very important.
it does kind of feel like I've been trapped in the Mordor if Mordor were just an endless gas station for my entire life.
But it is not enough. We also have to see and investigate their whole developing process in different points of time. This is called historical viewpoint, and it is the second principle of materialist dialectics. As I mentioned earlier, everything always changes and develops. That's why when we learn about anything, we have to also learn and understand their processes of development. For example, I am looking at this beautiful flower, but is it always a flower like this? Nope, it was a seed, then it became a sapling, then a full plant, then a flower as now.
Here's the problem with this analogy. A flower is an organism. It has a life cycle. When we're talking about like historical materialism, we aren't talking about the life cycle of an organism. We're talking about irrevocable changes based on developments in how we relate to the world. And we can't predict from like previous events necessarily. Like, there's not like that kind of like cyclical recurrence of there's a polis and there's like that. That's what Whig history does. That's not how it goes in Marxist history, or in historical materialism. Everything is irrevocable, and when it's new, it changes everything. It's just completely disanalogous.
It will die and decay in the future. Understanding the whole development of this flower makes me respect its beauty more, makes me value it more. In my next video, we will talk more about this changing process, which Marx defines using qualities and quantities. But I think that's too complicated to cover in this introductory video. If you're really interested and can't wait for part 2, I will link to a video in the description which EJ already did on this subject. Now let me tell you a true story. It's about my comrade, American Johnson, the guy whose dad drinks beer on road trips. 10 years ago, he was a right-wing libertarian and a filthy capitalist. Sorry, Jay. Now he's an anarcho-communist, a true comrade. So, is he good or bad? You can't have the right answer because in this point of time he's a good comrade, but in his past he was a dirty, dirty capitalist. So instead of essentializing him into one simple conclusion, we have to see EJ as a whole developing process. Essentializing him or anybody is meaningless, and you can't learn anything from other people if you do that. By looking at the changing of his life, we can learn from good decisions that he made, such as why and how he became a leftist. And we also can learn from his mistakes and bad decisions, such as why he fell into libertarian ideology and why he was a capitalist for 10 years. These two principles are very important in real life.
Pause it real quick, if you could. Because this is, I think, where the actual material conditions that she's been trying to go at, this is where that falls apart. And it becomes challenging. The line she just says where she's talking about where he becomes... we can ask about his decisions of why he became blah, blah, blah. Again, presupposes an agency and a choice as a subject. That's not how that works. Yeah. What was his world that he was living in that caused him to be that way? We can't learn from him. We can utilize him as a singular point, which we can see the network effect and social milieu around, which produced him, which we can learn from. We can't learn anything from him. We can't learn anything from me. We can't learn anything from Marx. We can't learn it. We can learn from the material conditions that produce these people and see how they interact in order for us to prevent that in the future, or produce that in the future. Very specifically, that the idea of putting it as a why he decided or why he chose puts a weird individual onus on a person that I don't think fits with even like I know why they do this in the school-bound curriculum style thing, because the more that you can put the onus on the individual, the more that you can create a personal alienated responsibility. Marx kind of talked about this. But very much this is not how I would say Marx talks about his stuff, or to be honest, Lenin either.
Yeah, what would be useful and how you could direct this to be like consistent with historical materialism is you wouldn't look at, well, what choices did he make to become X? You would say, why is it the case that the range of options he had were X, Y, and Z? Why do we assume that the only thing he could have become was a libertarian or a communist or, I don't know, or a fascist or a conservative or like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like that would be downstream of your material conditions or things that are downstream of material conditions. This is not. Did he have a father? Did he have a father that drove drunk often enough that he had to hide it from the police? My case, did he experience massive trauma, which led him to self-destruction and ultimately to kind of these are material conditions. What produced those? How did these things interact? It's not, oh no, I got into Deleuze because I am smart and sexy. That is not the answer for anybody. I mean, like, it's a one-sided answer. It's still true, but...
No, it's not. Trust me on that one.
I'll take your word for it. We'll keep going.
If we look at them as a chart, the comprehensive viewpoint will be the Y line, and the historical viewpoint will be the X line. The X line shows the timeline of the development. The Y line shows the different aspects. If you connect every aspect with every point of time, you can draw a diagram of the development of a thing. So instead of seeing a thing as just a dot like this, now you see the whole of its diagram. Isn't that cool?
I mean, graphs are cool. I don't know how this helps us, though. I actually, that just went completely over my head. Did you have any commentary on the use of the graph there? Or shall we continue?
No.
All right.
Dialectics, have you have a deeper...
No, I mean, look, the concept of aspects and timeline, again, my money is that this stuff is in those books and the way that it's in the textbooks. And again, the more that they're able to atomize it and place it on the individual, the better for their society. That's the way it works. We want to organize people as much as possible.
Yeah. So you, despite ostensibly deploying a Marxist analysis, you're deploying precisely that mode of analysis that Marx was concerned to critique, namely the liberal one. You're specifically talking about atomistic, liberal, ideology-bearing subjects. So it's...
understanding at everything, especially human. And time after time, it will become your mindset that makes you always want to investigate before giving any conclusion or judgment. And I believe it would help you avoid a lot of mistakes in real life and also help you avoid many shitty takes on Twitter. Seriously, every day I see so many hot takes from online people, especially content creators who try to act like they know the best. And when people try to reason with them, they dismiss all the arguments and think everybody is stupid. I do believe that you need to be really ignorant to think you know better than everyone else. So, in summary, the materialist dialectics is a method of reflecting the real world in humans' minds. The most basic law of this method is to understand things in their relationship with other things, in their own movement and development.
Okay, that's okay. That one's okay.
That's
good.
Perfect. That's
Yes.
spot on. Cut this frame, re-upload it. You've done your video.
Look, like 2 minutes of this video are very good.
Just this frame. Let's just do
this
that frame and you're set. What is dialectical materialism? Gap. All right, thanks. I can't fight with you on this.
And we also have to check and view all aspects of a thing before making any conclusion or judgment about that thing. This method of thinking is very, very important for all of us, especially leftists. It helps us avoid meaningless arguments such as, was Stalin good or bad? Was Mao good or bad? Was Marx racist or not racist? To me, it's just a waste of time if we fall into this kind of argument.
I don't like characterizing these arguments as meaningless. They are very meaningful in a context. If we're talking, for example, about whether or not Mao or Stalin are representatives of, like, good policy or positive or negative, like, emergences from certain kinds of movements and certain kinds of contexts, that's an extremely meaningful argument. Whether Marx was racist or not, I mean, again, like, he is making essentially European technological and political development the protagonist of history. Like, maybe you consider that to be like an acceptable cost for the benefit that the success of a communist movement would represent, but like you're fundamentally talking about a very powerful form of cultural hegemony here. And again, like maybe you regard that as acceptable. There's no like hard line about that, but whether or not Marx has like some kind of, and especially in terms of if these cultural divides are determined because of our current conditions along like what are considered to be racial grounds, that would be like that's at the very least significant. It merits thinking about. I don't think that's a meaningless argument.
A person could be good in this aspect, but be bad in other aspects. A person could be wrong in this part of his life, but also right in other parts of his life.
And again, like this is, it actually goes back to how she was evaluating EJ before, because like the issue is not whether or not individuals are good or bad. Nobody cares. Mao and Stalin are dead. The issue is like, what do we take from this? If we determine that something is good or bad, that will be determinative of whether we regard similar things or apparently similar things as being acceptable or being things that we should try to quell or prevent. Like that's extremely important. It bears nothing whatsoever on historical materialism, but like it's just irrelevant. Like we're not concerned with the state of Mao's soul. We're concerned with whether or not what Mao did should be learned from in a particular way. It's something that we should 100%. Try to replicate. Yeah.
Well, I would even go so far as the importance to know about Marx's racism is to know what implicit biases and cliches he didn't understand he even had. Like the way he writes, at no point does he write like the white workers of the world unite. Like he doesn't write. He's not like a hyper explicit racist, but he's got for sure racist biases and some really fucked up views.
Yeah, if by worker he ends up deploying concepts that just so happen outside of his awareness to particularize his argument to white workers, or maybe worker only like in his context really. I
mean, he said some things about Mexicans at one point. I think he literally called them lazy Mexicans, him or Ingalls. Like, yeah. Like he said some unique shit. But my point is, like, it's not saying, oh, Marx is racist, dismiss him. There's a totalizing of Marx in that case that is silly, in the same way saying that it's not important. That's also silly. Marx was a complex human, giant, emergent creature that we can go, hey, here's all the stuff. What created him? What built him? What did he do? Oh, in his stuff, is there an implicit this or that? When he refers to Asiatic production, for example, is it derisive? Is it because he has a misunderstanding of how production was actually being done? Because he was slightly like, the more we're able to have that lens, the better we can understand what really Marx was getting at. The more we're able to sort of back up and go, what are the cliches I'm stuck with? What are the things we're all stuck with that we can't see? And if people don't call them out, we fuck up. And that's literally the point of a critique. Criticism is not anger. It is a critique. It is helping people see things they can't see otherwise, helping systems be better than they are.
Now, on the flip side, if she has in mind, as I suspect she does, someone like Sargon who says, hey, Marx was a racist, ergo, Marx was worthless, that analysis is absolutely beneath contempt. So, I mean, to that extent, like, I agree with what she's responding to here, but the approach is wrong. Because, again, it's just not important, like, whether or not these dead people were good or bad, more or less. The question is, what did they do? And what should we be taking from that? And that's about it. Or what should we be suspicious of based on that if we're inheriting theory from them?
A great example would be Thomas Jefferson, my favorite example of this, where all men are created equal except for the young black women I enjoy raping. Well, we shouldn't talk about such things because we really, he wasn't really a racist. It's like, we need to step back and go, he can say great things or write great documents or actually have some pretty good thoughts on general philosophy or even Islam, oddly enough. Doesn't mean the rest isn't true, and it doesn't mean that those things don't color it and color the world that we're in. Sorry, I brought up critical race theory. I apologize so much.
No, that's... Oh my god. It's okay. Well... Oh, God, how long have we been going for? We must be hitting the 3-hour mark. We're at 2 hours and 50 minutes.
We are.
Yeah, we're getting close. We're getting there.
Marx was racist against Mexican.
Oh, we have a super chat. Jay Grimes says for $5. Thank you, by the way. I think what she was referring to here specifically is the so-called quote-unquote numbers game that capitalism is guaranteed to always lose. Can you clarify what you're responding to there, Jay Grimes, so I know what that was directed towards? Don't pay me for the clarification, to be clear. I just want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth in terms of response. Let's keep going.
And black people. EJ made a really good video about this topic in his channel. I was also in that video talking about Marx and Ho Chi Minh. If you want to learn more about it, the link is in the description. To me, the fact that Marx was racist doesn't affect the value of Marxism at all. Marxism is not a racist ideology.
Unless it is. That's the trick. Like, maybe it is, if categories that are sort of inherent to it are downstream from, again, like racially disparate, categories, I guess.
That privilege, for example, say, Western developed countries over indigenous ones that have a different, complete way of doing production and sort of fly under the general radar.
Yeah, I mean, in a certain sense, it even privileges capitalist production insofar as you require capitalist production in order to move into, like, further stages of development. And so you can't have, like, socialism in, like, outside of, like, a certain primitive form, not the form we're aiming at. You can't have, like, you can't make those same interventions or like, prioritize places that haven't developed to a certain point on that theory, because they're not there yet. And so you're essentially treating them as things to be, like, brought kicking and screaming into the present coercively once you have that development elsewhere, and that's more or less, like, unchallenged from within that advantage. Of course, like, anti-colonial theorists do this all the time, but it's yeah. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. You were going to say something.
No, I said yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is, I know, a lot. I'm adding a lot to the discussion at this point.
Oh no, that's fine. That is validate me more. This is good for the brand. That's what I'm paying you to do, after all.
Yeah.
In fact, Marxism helps free oppressed people of all races and build a better society for everyone. Another example that I want to mention is Stalin. He had many wrong decisions in his life, but we also have to appreciate what he did to help the USSR, such as fighting the Nazi in the 30s and the 40s.
This is just such a weird thing to say. It's like, yeah, his policies were brutal and they resulted in the destruction of myriad lives. But he defended the state of which he was ahead when it was under attack by an ally that betrayed him. Like, that's not
specifically, he ordered peasants who lived under subsistence survival to go die for him.
Oh, yeah, no, yeah. The frontline fighters didn't even have guns, just run at the Nazis. Like, she makes it sound as if, like, Stalin himself, like, rode in with a horse and a saber and charged at Stalingrad. It's like, no. Stalin was never in any danger. He was safe at home. And he did what anyone else in his position would have done of necessity for his own preservation. Like what you could argue. Here's what you could argue. Like, Stalin's policies were brutal, but they possibly enabled... my history on this is terrible, but they possibly enabled the Soviet Union to actually materially contend with the Nazis when they were invaded. Okay, like something like that. That would make sense. Okay, so it's like terrible, like costly policy, but it did have the effect of allowing the Soviet Union as an entity to survive the most deadly invasion in its, well, I guess the only invasion in its history. But like she's going to go on to say that like Stalin was bad because she. I mean, we don't really know, to be clear, but because he dissed Ho Chi Minh. And we're not even going to...
the next line is awful. The next line is awful.
Well, we're not even going to mention, like, any of the lives he destroyed or, like, anything. Like,
If you were to say... you could make the same thing with Mao, I think. Not that I equivocate the two at all intentionally, but you could say with both. Oh, they modernized an exceptionally difficult country in a way, in a modern industrialized form in years that took the West much longer. And they did a lot of rather awful things or mistaken things in some cases, and truly cold-blooded awful things to get there. And if you can justify that, that's fine. But say what you think. Don't say don't just ignore the biggest things that these people did. Modernizing a country and pogroms are not like things to forget.
No, we'll just... I have stuff to say about this, but we'll just run through the next little section so we like have it down.
The USSR was instrumental to the victory of the world against fascism. You can't deny the role of Stalin in that victory.
Yes, I can, absolutely. The Russian soldiers and the Russian peasants who also fought, I guess they were soldiers, though they made that victory. Stalin did jack.
Yeah, at best you could argue Stalin chose the right generals to lead who made some pretty, as far as decisions go, not really good ones, to be honest. There's some really interesting strategy there, but Stalin? No. Like
the Russian Tsar had a more active role in the war effort than Stalin did in his. Like, it's...
Now, I know that many people had called me Stalin apologist for saying that. Well, let me tell you this, I am not. And after this lesson about dialectical materialism, I hope that you will change your mind about that. I don't agree with people who said Stalin was bad and we shouldn't care or learn about him. Because he actually made the USSR strong militarily and helped the world defeat fascism.
No, he implemented policies that, while brutal, did have the effect of making the USSR strong militarily, which helped the world defeat. I'm actually not entirely clear, like, how true that is. Like, my understanding is that the USSR was actually, like, pretty ill-equipped compared to the Nazis. But, okay, like, the state that he led was powerful enough, better, like, whether or not he was, like, instrumental. Under him, it was powerful enough to defeat the Nazis. Okay, cool.
Real quick, yeah. This drives me insane because the other part of this that is Marx developed, the materialist philosophy has specifically against the idea of the big man theory of history, that this person did that and therefore that's how history changed. This king did that. Literally, Marx, if there's anything he would have like stomped on if he could, like a fly, and crushed, it's this idea of the one man, the hero who chose the fate of time and all you see are people who utilize Marxist dialectics or whatever the fuck they call it to justify and utilize that in the same way by saying, oh no, Stalin did these things, he was a great man. It's like, no, the people fucking did those things. For Mao, by the way, the people too, same thing. This is how it goes. The people did the things. We like our heroes and we like our names, but that's literally the opposite of the materialist conditions that people are living in.
Well, this is just another reflection of, like, again, the apologist attitude, I'm presuming, of the textbooks that she's referring to. Like, Dialectical Materialism and Marxism, that's empirically grounded and serious. That's not idealistic nonsense. And, like, communist heroes like Stalin and Mao, like, yeah, sure, they were bad, but they were also, like, heroic and they were necessary. You know, Russia needed strong men to save itself in time of crisis. Like, it's the same thing.
No, and I'm conflating even just in my response. I'm trying my best to steelman her argument, and everyone in the comments is saying he purged the officer corps. He was awful. He was a shit leader. Like, the fact that the Nazis were taken back is really due to a handful of leadership, but really the Russian people and some of the more extraordinarily horrific bravery bits I've ever heard in my life.
Well, there's no reason at all to do an apology for Stalin, because it only hurts your credibility. Like, if you're actually
in this video of all videos,
if you're actually serious about like spreading the appeal of socialism, or of communism, or of Marxist-Leninism, or whatever you want, allow that these people were bad, but that they were individuals who don't represent the theory or the movement at large. Like bad people got into positions of power in ostensibly communist states, or states that emerged as the result of communist movements, because, like, history is kind of chaotic and, like, nobody knew really what they were doing, and that happened. Like, that's fair. You can make a similar description of every other state in history. That's not, like, unless you're specifically trying to valorize people who, through their own viciousness, were the instruments of extraordinary suffering and destruction. That's not really that big a thing to overcome. You can just say, yeah, that guy kind of sucked, but you know what? Like, that doesn't really necessarily, like, that doesn't refute the principles that we're espousing. It's just that they weren't put into practice because the wrong people were in the positions to make decisions. Like, that's such an easy case to sustain, and people do it all the time. That's how capitalist apologists work as well. It's just so needless.
I don't agree with people who believe Stalin did nothing wrong, because it's so obvious that he did many things wrong, including cheating Ho Chi Minh badly. He thought Ho Chi Minh was a spy from a capitalist country and didn't believe Vietnam could win against France.
Yes, this is what Stalin is reviled for, his pessimistic attitude towards the Vietnamese Revolution. It's not like all of the people he put into gulags, and all of the people he purged, and all of the people he starved. Like, it's the lack of confidence, and I kind of didn't like Ho Chi Minh. Wow, what a piece of shit. We'll just keep going. There's nothing even to say here. Like, it's so transparent. There's no point. Again, like, I want to be very clear here. I don't think Luna's a malevolent actor. I think she's, like, just kind of out of her depth here, and I think she's, like, a decent person. I've seen her and EJ before. Like, they seem really nice. And they seem really nice here. This is just such a destructive tack to take for anybody. It's also deeply revealing, because, again, this is what there's 100%. This is what was taught in her schools. That this is, Stalin. He doubted Ho Chi Minh, and he didn't believe we could do it, but we did it anyway. Which is kind of the story that's told. It's fairly accurate, but that story is told as part of this great man tale of Ho Chi Minh that is taught in order to, again, organize production and people and create the subjects that they need. Well, in addition, on the flip side, it's also used to cover over, like, here's an example of a bad thing Stalin did, and just, eliding the really bad stuff Stalin did, of which that is not one. That is at worst, like, an example of poor judgment. Like, okay, Stalin couldn't tell the future, and he had a contemptful attitude towards Ho Chi Minh. All right, that kind of sucks. But what about
And if you want to own look, Ho Chi Minh did some shit that I wouldn't necessarily be that upset with, that I think some people would be really angry about. Some of the people he went after, some of the stuff Stalin did. Like, if you want to have that discussion, we can. But this is not how you do that, and this is not how you phrase that. And again, this is just more of the great man theory, that Russia was Stalin, that Vietnam was Ho Chi Minh and not the people, not, again, to talk about the Vietnam War. Sure, maybe some good leadership at the top, but holy shit, you want a fighting force of people. The Viet Cong were incredible, and they were a peasant army of farmers. It was amazing. Like I said, again, great man theory, hate it.
Well, actually, on that note, one thing that I really appreciate from Luna, actually, is she really pushed the clarification that, like, we refer to them as the Viet Cong, but the Viet Minh was actually how they referred to themselves, as Viet Cong was a derogatory term. I found that super interesting. I can't remember which video that was. I think it was actually the response to Destiny. I'll have to review that one. Like,
excellent. I'm a horrible person because I've been using that my whole life.
No. Like, Luna's actually got some great content. It's just like they just do this needless, stupid stuff as well. That just it boggles my mind as to why they need to do it, because they have like an interesting perspective and data that most people don't have, and they could run with that. They don't need to do this. Or to, to pick fights with Vosh or people like that. Like, it doesn't help anybody.
No, it does not.
And Stalin refused to support Vietnam, which obviously pisses me off. But that doesn't mean I want to waste all my time arguing about whether Stalin was essentially good or essentially bad. What a waste of time.
Luna, this video is 41 minutes. You made this aside, not me.
Speaking of Ho Chi Minh, the great leader of Vietnam, he also made mistakes. In my opinion, his most serious mistake was the land reforms in the 50s. My family members were victims, so I do know about that very well. In the early 1950s, the north of Vietnam wanted to build a communist society while we were fighting against France. Ho Chi Minh wanted to redistribute the farmland so everyone would have their own farm, their own means of production. My family was super rich back then. We were landlords for maybe 100 years, and we owned shitload of land. The communists in my grandparents' village implemented that order in a horrible way. They took everything from my grandparents, even the shirt on my grandma's body. They tortured my grandpa for days in the big yard of the village. All the peasants who worked for my grandparents took the chance to get revenge too. It was a very traumatizing memory for both of my grandparents. So in 1956, Ho Chi Minh realized what he did wrong and immediately fixed it. In our National Assembly in the same year, he cried and apologized to the whole nation. My family understood that his original order was not that brutal. Ho Chi Minh just wanted to take the land of rich people and give it to poor people so everybody could have equal divisions of land.
Okay, so we did a little bit of research into this, or more accurately, you did. And
I have a lot more to do.
We want to be, but we want to be really careful with how we handle this. So I'm going to address, first of all, just the drama aspect of this, which is boring, but just like at one point during his coverage of this, Vosh was laughing at this particular usage of the thing. It's clear to me that Vosh was not laughing at the horror that Luna's grandparents experienced. What he was laughing at was the deployment of this in an argument, because it's for whatever reason attempting to sanitize the attitude of the revolutionary movement, of the peasants, of Ho Chi Minh, to the inherent brutality of the land reform. Is it the Land Reform Act or the Land Reform, like, what was it? It was just a movement? Or?
It was the Land Reform movement. There was a period of time in Vietnam, 1952-ish to 1954, where they decided, yes, kill all the landlords. Not necessarily. It was go all the landlords, because Vietnam prior to this was effectively an agrarian, I'm hesitant to say slave state, but it's not far off. The wealthy owned everything. And the poor worked subsistent living in farms, very similar to, to a lot of colonial states, to be frank. And a lot of that was because of colonialism. France wasn't exactly great at this point. Neither was a lot of the other partners that they had dealt with. There's a lot of, it's Southeast Asia. There's histories of a lot of awful shit. And so again, no matter what I say, not casting judgments, more having the conversation. Because again, this is tough. But the nature of the movement was the Ho Chi Minh's leadership decided we were going to take off the land and issued edicts. And there's a couple of different ones. They were aware that they were sending essentially people to go terrorize the country. but they were specific. Execute 1 out of every 1,000 landlords, give them a chance to make recompense, pay back the money that they had been stealing, because effectively you were sharecroppers. Like, we're talking about sharecropping throughout all of Vietnam.
This is very important to pin down, because there's actually language here that's revealing in what Luna's saying. She didn't say that they just came and brutalized the landowners, because, specifically her grandparents, because they were just like monstrous communists who hated landlords. The language she used specifically is revenge. There were like serious local animosities as a result of these relations, and not like in the sense of like, oh, you don't like your Walmart boss. Like, there was hatred here. This was brutal levels of exploitation. So when we're
extremely so.
Yeah, so when we're talking about like a violent attitude towards landlords, like, to be clear, don't endorse that. However, that was going on in reverse prior to that. It wasn't that the landlords were just in a peaceable relationship and it was a little bit disadvantageous, but, you know, people got by. It's like, no, the workers were brutalized.
40% of the entire population was landless,
Yeah.
period. So they were full sharecroppers, like full land. It was awful.
Yeah. So when we read about, and you'll have a more particular grasp of this, like, not that I expect you to be authoritative on this, but when we read about like the attitude towards the treatment of disappropriated landlords, is that the word, disappropriated? You know.
I would say, yeah, persecuted would be, depending on how you put it. Like, they went hard at these people. Now, again, I'm not saying it's not justified. I happen to have 3 or 4 books on Ho Chi Minh because I like a lot of what he said, and I thought what he did was kind of extraordinary. I mean, in the face of a lot of things.
Yeah, but when we read about like their attitude towards, like, you had an interesting line about effectively engaging in terrorism against landlords, like kill a certain percentage of them.
Yeah, so you kill 1 in 1,000. Specifically, he sent everyone out. He said he had lines where it was like, and it was not him, not directly Ho Chi Minh, but the leadership. Go out, kill this many, give them a chance to recompense, put the landlords in jail, do not harm their children and their wives, all that stuff. They had a lot of things in there where it was very particular. If they refuse to give money, you can execute. Like, it was all these crazy things. Yeah. And they knew, and they were aware in some of the secondary texts I was reading, they're very aware that it was going to cause generalized chaos, especially in the Mekong Delta. In the Mekong Delta, you're talking about 70% landless peasants sharecropping. Like, when you're at that level of landless, you're talking about some really fucking angry people.
Yeah.
Like, that's an extraordinary amount. Very specifically, the offer of land. You do this, I'm going to redistribute land equally to everyone, which was the promise, as she said here.
Oh, and Wednesday,
I can see a lot of things happening.
Yeah, Wednesday in the chat makes an excellent point as well. Like, we're not necessarily, when we're talking about landlords, we're not talking about like native Vietnamese. We're talking about a lot of French people.
Correct.
Yeah, which is not like to say, oh, they're French, so it's okay if you brutalize them. But like, the point is, these were people who were being horribly, horribly abused by effectively a foreign power. And like, you
for 70 years.
Yeah, that
70, almost 100 years, no, like 80 years at least. Jesus.
Now, on the subject of like the state of Stalin's soul, say, when we're assessing this, you take that into account. Like, yeah, they weren't, shall we say, perfect Christians in how they went about it, but we can understand, like, there was more than just evil going on here. Like, these were brutalized people who were responding to being brutalized. And it's not to say, again, like, that was good or that was acceptable or that, like, therefore Ho Chi Minh was a saint. But it's a mistake to start characterizing this as, like, the kind of, I don't know, like, you know how, like, people like Stalin and whatnot are like,
this was intended for terror. Ho Chi Minh had no issue talking. He had no issue talking about that, and he spoke to his soldiers, to the guerrillas. The phrasing, and I'll try to do my best to recall it. I don't have the book open. Destruction is our aim. Find roads, destroy them, so that the enemy cannot use them. Destroy homes, so they can't be housed. That was the way he talked about it when they went into South Vietnam, when they were fighting. Like, he was aware of the nature of terror, the nature of infrastructure, the nature of all these things. And so he was open to the way these things were carried out. Now, again, the context of it is important. Well, he's doing this, and the bifurcation during this era of Vietnam began, and we had North and South Vietnam. Right across the border, the U.S.-backed asshole, of course, on the other side, started killing communists in numbers 2 to 3x easily.
Oh, yeah.
What Ho Chi Minh was doing. So,
yeah, lest we forget, the landlords were also fighting back. Like, this wasn't like a one-sided thing.
Yeah, they were. Well, and it gets really awkward because when Ho Chi Minh first started his guerrilla campaign against the French, we didn't like the French very much, so we backed Ho Chi Minh and trained him and gave him weapons. Not a joke, and something that has repeated a few times. We're really good at that.
You mentioned 9/11 a little while ago. Yeah, so I like...
It's Wednesday's point. Wednesday nails it. This isn't just taking back land. This is a response against colonizers. And this is, if we want to get into, I mean, there's a blind spot for a few YouTubers, and we'll specifically say with Vosh, he's been down this road about colonizers and how people respond and condemning this or talking about that. When you're talking about like an overthrow of an oppressed people at the level of this, there is an expected level of bloodshed. There are stories genuinely of this where like they got tortured. She didn't say they murdered and burned my whole family. Like they got revenge, but they didn't murder her whole family.
No, there are stories where they did, to be clear. But
there are, but also you're talking about 10 to 13,000 people died during this over the course of the time, as far as we can really tell. But you're talking about, 70 million, like you're talking about millions of people. Like the numbers are small given what we were talking about.
Yeah, and there was an expectation which frankly was reasonable. Like, let's be realistic, given any attitude by the revolutionary government. You were going to have bloodshed. That doesn't excuse it, but like you're dealing with these kinds of numbers and these kinds of conditions. You can't control that to a certain extent. You have to make judgments to mitigate it, but like that's the game, to put it bluntly.
It's the comment I made earlier with the Tsar's children were executed, and I've had people say, "Why the fuck did they do that?" And it's like, well, you have to. Like, you can't leave a martyr. Like,
well, you can't leave a martyr. You can't leave an heir to the throne either. Like,
you can't leave an heir. You can't. You have to. How the game is played when you're doing a revolution, when you're changing things at such a deeply systemic level against an opponent who absolutely has already proven that they are willing to flatly murder huge numbers of people if they are even slightly upset, which the French really did a lot. You've got to handle things a different way. So
Yeah, so, like, the apologia for Ho Chi Minh is weak, but the point stands. Like, this was not a one-sided thing where it was just, evil tankies killing everybody. That's what they always do. No, the people they were doing that to were doing that back. Like, there are certain, like, kinds of scenarios where you don't need to condone either side. Like, you just, that's the reality. You look at it.
It's the world that they were living in. And Ho Chi Minh, he'd studied abroad. He had actually dealt with some amazing thinkers and had chances to talk with them. There's some pretty cool stories about that. I mean, ultimately, though, we're talking about a deeply, deeply oppressed people. And again, the same thing I'd say, it's not Ho Chi Minh, it's the people. He gave them a sort of combined purpose, and he helped towards that. But he was produced just like all of us, just like production shifted in Vietnam over time, I would say, is not necessarily what he may have decided or wanted.
No, and it wasn't.
It is what it is.
Yeah, the violence wasn't the product of his will.
No.
The violence was really just enabled, if anything, by, again, like circumscribing what violence was permissible. It was limited to the extent that the rule was followed at all. Now, I would defy, like, given like a clear-eyed view of what was actually going on to the Vietnamese people, anyone to say that, given a similar scenario, your average American worker would not do exactly the same thing, or something very similar. We're not talking about people who were just like tired of their McDonald's job, getting one on their boss and like going insane and burning them at the stake. We're talking about people who were absolutely deprived and brutalized and often killed. Like it's bad. But we'll finish this up. We got 2 minutes left, I think, and we've been going at this for a long time.
But he didn't predict that the local communists and local peasants would take everything and even torture those rich people.
Yeah, see, that's wrong. Like they did. They did predict that. What they didn't predict was that it would be like absolute madness in a lot of cases, but they did, like it was part of their logic. Like they knew that there was going to be exemplary killings.
Ho Chi Minh found out what was happening. He immediately asked for the release of all people under arrest or being tortured and gave the house and a piece of land back to my family. Now, many of my family members are communists and even work for the local government.
Real quick, pause it.
That's
Just as a specific, there were a handful of landlords, various reasons, who he didn't pardon, in fact, didn't get involved with and were executed by the state. So
Yeah.
that didn't happen.
Yeah, so it's like yeah, you good for Luna's family, not bad, but like it doesn't sanitize a whole lot. Like there were reasons for this. It wasn't just because he loved the landlord so much. And again, like how many years did this go on for before that took place? Like, this
70.
No, I'm talking about like the Land Reform Act or movement.
Oh,
Keep calling it
year and a half, 2 years.
Year and a half, 2 years. Okay, well, that's not too bad. I thought it was longer than that. I thought it was like 4 years.
So, I mean, okay, so it really started in 1952.
Yeah.
In 1954, the pact was signed, Geneva, whatever it was called, separated North and South, and it continued, but I wouldn't call it the same thing. At that point, it was more about the distribution rather than the execution.
Right, okay, fair enough.
said, the mistake Ho Chi Minh made doesn't affect the value Ho Chi Minh taught, and it doesn't dismiss all the sacrifice he made for Vietnam.
This is true. This is good. Again, though, we're focusing on Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh did not make a lot of personal sacrifices for Vietnam relative to the Vietnamese revolutionaries. Like, the emphasis on heroes is frustrating here.
Vietnamese people still love him and respect him as a human, but Ho Chi Minh is not a symbol of perfection. No one is. Some people say that because Marx was sexist, Marxism must be sexist.
It could be. That's the danger. It very well could be. It probably is. And we'll keep going.
Well, in our very first democratic election in 1945, Ho Chi Minh, a Marxist, immediately pushed the idea that women should be allowed to vote. There was no question, no argument against that at all. And since then, Vietnamese women always have had rights to vote. Well, if it's true, then it doesn't mean all Marxists are sexist.
No, what it means is that they weren't sexist with respect to suffrage in Vietnam, and I don't know what those votes count for.
In the late 40s, like, we're not talking about in like the 1800s.
Yeah. Like this was the norm by now. Which, I mean, it doesn't diminish it, but it's like it's the flip side though, right? Like, okay, Stalin was bad, but that doesn't bear on Marxist theory. It's like, well, Vietnamese were open-minded about women voting. That doesn't bear on Marxist theory either. Like
the Americans had women voting by then. Quote, a Marxist country.
Yeah. Indeed.
Ho Chi Minh did exactly what dialectical materialism taught him to do.
Oh, no.
Learn the good and avoid the bad.
No.
Dialectical
Yep.
materialism
Yep.
helps us avoid useless arguments and focus on finding the best solutions for the problems we are coping with. We learn
I
from
also
good
find tautology to be the best way to handle things.
Oh, that was physically painful. I've seen this before too, and I forgot about this ending. Oh god, okay, let's finish it.
ideas and also learn from mistakes that we and other people make. Dialectical materialism helps us build a better version of ourselves. I admit, it's hard to learn at first, but once you have it in your mind, you will have a different view about this world.
Once you learn to avoid the bad and go for the good, it'll be better. Okay. All right. Well, I think is that it? Is that it?
So instead of being angry and
here we go.
annoyed with people we don't agree with, now we are willing to talk to them in good faith, and maybe we will learn that they are right and we are wrong, who knows? At least we can always learn something from other people, right? Alright, I hope that this video was not boring to you.
Okay, so great advice, like very, very wholesome. I don't know why she needs it to have like this big like transcendent lesson at the end, but like, okay, great, yeah, you should get to know people, you should talk to them, and you should try to understand their views instead of just roundly condemning them out of hand. Sure, cool. Nothing to do with dialectical materialism at all. Most of this video didn't have anything to do with dialectical materialism. There were a few one-off lines that were good, but they were misplaced, but they would have served. Like, there were parts. You can definitely see there was an influence there. But that's about as far as we can go. I have to say, like, I've got some like issues with Vosh's tactical decisions with respect to like this video with Luna. I think Luna's generally a lovely person. I'd say the same thing about EJ. I have to say I largely agree with his assessment of this, like with caveats, and not a lot of caveats, by the way. I think he was largely correct. I was in the chat when he was watching it originally. Like I largely endorse his criticism of them, and like let's be honest, Luna and EJ again are not innocent here. They went out guns blazing against Vosh in some really invidious ways. They
have
went
before. Like,
before
this wasn't a new
yeah.
thing.
No, they went for the pedo thing. They went for everything, and like, you can't expect someone to just be like selfishly patient with something as destructive as that, just because they're fellow leftists. Like, I'm sorry. Like I get it. Luna's cute and everything, and they seem like nice, ordinary, pleasant people, and they probably are. But you don't throw bombs like that and just like oh, I can't imagine, I don't understand why they're being so mean. It's because you tried to destroy them publicly. Like, what do you think is going to happen? Ugh. It's
the challenge with any semblance of leftism, and I behind the scenes, let's separate them all out. I appreciate what both sides of this do. I really do. I think there's a level of organization and advocation and working against what I see as a general shift to the right overall.
Yep.
Even if there's slightly misinformed information or poor theory or edgy bullshit, I'd rather have that than someone go, I actually think that Ben Shapiro has a good point. I'd rather that. But I'll say, when we start having these things and interacting, it just becomes clear that there is no central movement. I don't see a possibility for it as a thing.
Jay Grimes, thank you for the $5. $5 to ask you to read Grover Fur. I don't know who that is, but I will not read Grover Fur if somebody can up that amount. No, but I don't know who that is. Let me know who that is in the server. I think you're in the server, Jay Grimes. Yeah, I think I generally agree with you. I have a great appreciation for, especially like the Luna has a lot of on the ground information that is extraordinarily interesting and has been extraordinarily educational. She has her area of competence, and she is really competent there. I don't know anything about EJ, but I'm sure he's fine too. But like, this was bad. It was really careless. It was really, even for me, and I'm not well versed in this at all, but like, I could detect that there were serious problems here. This, like, the stupid like, yeah.
No, Antonio put it best very early on when you said, so what is dialectical materialism? Like, as a thing, and he simply says, like, look, it's a term utilized by the dogmatic side of a certain groups of Marxist-Leninists who've taken it and kind of run with it, and it means, at that point, when he was saying that, really the discussion is less, hey, can we bring them back to the reality of what Marx or even Lenin said, but instead an interpretation of an interpretation of interpretation, because where they're at and the conversation they're having is over there somewhere, not here. And it becomes very difficult because we're not talking about dialectics, we're not talking about materialism, we're talking about a representation that she was taught that isn't really fleshed out, isn't very whole, and ultimately, despite all of whatever efforts she may have, doesn't necessarily lead to a coherent overall discussion. But with all of that, I say, and I mean this about Vosh, they're all shitheads in their own ways. They're trying to do the right thing. Her story about her family being tortured in Vietnam could have ended like the story of many Cubans in Florida, if you've ever known one, who talks about they took my house. Well, yeah, it was a giant house, and yes, I had slaves, and yes, I beat them. Like that's reactionary response, where they now come to here in America and they vote for whoever will invade Cuba and as far right wing as they can get. She's not done that. No. That we need to fight for the people. We need to continue to fight for the poor, despite these things that were taken from my family in the past. That's not why I'm here. I care about these things. By the way, generally speaking, are the same fucking things Vosh cares about, but we're all shitheads. God damn it.
More or less, yeah. I endorse that analysis almost completely. Yeah, I don't know. I would very much like, and I realize I'm asking this stupidly because we can't, but can we just like not be like this? And I'm not referring to the Luna video, just like in terms of like the discourse about this. And like for whatever reason, people were bringing in like my Professor Flowers analysis to do this. Like this has any bearing whatsoever on this issue. Can we just not like be complete fucking morons? Like Luna had a bad take on socialism. Okay.
Let's talk to her about it. Let's have a discussion. Vosh has bad takes. It happens. Even if he doesn't want to necessarily even talk about it. Hassan has bad takes. Philosophy Tube, definitely bad takes. Plastic Pills, bad takes. I have bad takes. We're called people, and if any one of us were infallible, we would be the great man that ultimately all us reactionaries really want.
I wait for you every day. But
we can't. At our core, and this is something that is by nature, I think, an American thing, and when an American thing becomes externalized, it's an imperial thing. We're reactionary. We're produced, I believe, too deeply within capitalism to have any other type of subjectivity than what we have. I mean, granted, yes, trying my best not to fully go into Deleuze here, but when we talk about the process of subjectivity production, none of us are free of it. None of us here. We are all reactionaries by any level of the imagination, and we don't know how to do better because we can't help ourselves but continue to go back to that and drink from the reactionary trough every time our wounds get slightly brought back out or our scars come back to light. And we can't just move forward and just accept people as they are. Her entire point about how he was this capitalist, he is not now, was a little clunky, but people are where they are. We are in a constant state of becoming. We are never anything. We are an eternal process of growth, of change and time that we're experiencing now. Allow us that. Allow me that, and I allow you that. My brother, my sister, whoever you may be. And that's the future of leftism. But we can't do it. Can't do it.
Well, we can't do it because there's a lot of money in this. Like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, here's the thing. I agree with you. That'd be lovely and all, but, like, the fact of the matter is, and I like Vosh. I don't think he's, like, relatively speaking, I don't like, consider him to be, like, a soulless shill all the way through, but, like, let's be realistic here. The reactions to this are not because of personal attacks of which he is surrounded. He has much bigger fish to fry if that was the case. It's not because this take in particular was so bad. There are far worse, amazingly. It's because Luna's got a following, and drama with Luna is money. It's attention, it's super chats, it's an excuse for people to make 3-hour-long streams talking about dialectical materialism. It's money.
Yeah. Oh no, it's the network, it's the system. Again, we're produced. Not to go back to Marx, but like our labor is producing the reality around us. And by the way, all of this is labor, whatever we may not think so, but that's what this is. We're producing the network effect that puts us in this place in the first place.
Brooks, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me for this extensive stream. Good God, I really should be paying you at this rate.
It's always fun. I always dig these conversations because it's, again, the thing for me, and it's why I don't often go on streams in general, and I hide in my little Deleuze server to talk about this stuff. it's to me about having discussions. Not anger, not judgments, not any of that shit. There's work to be done for us to figure out how to fix things, and this is not how we do it. We need to do it the way I appreciate how you've done it. It's one of the reasons I subscribed early on. It's just discuss and try to learn. That's all we got.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to post a link to... Brooks, forgive me, you don't have a channel. I know you have a server. Do you have a channel or something you'd like to shill here, or...?
I search for the Deleuze and Guattari Collective. We are a collective 3,200 strong on Discord, discord.gg/DGQC. If you want to learn more about Deleuze, Bergson, Guattari, we've got a Klosowski reading right now that's happening, starting soon. Simon Doan, Bataille, all of those guys. There's a bunch.
They automatically link my videos as a friend of the channel, so every time I make a Dune shit post, it appears in their Deleuze and Guattari Discord.
It's pretty great. No, it's great. But feel free to search for us. We do readings of Anti-Oedipus. There's a podcast and a YouTube channel.
I'll do you one
if you want to learn about it. We literally go through that.
I'm going to put a link in the description. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm going to put a link to that in the description. I will also put a link to Antonio's. That's the guy you were hearing earlier. I'll put a link to his channel on YouTube in the description. He has some excellent and remarkably clear takes on Hegel. You will understand Hegel probably better than if you read him directly in about 10 minutes of watching his stuff, which is... I don't endorse not reading Hegel as a result, but he does much better than me, frankly, like what I try to do sometimes. He tries to explain, like, actually, this stuff is understandable and it's relevant and it's interesting. Here's a general introduction that actually gives you like something to grapple onto so you can understand it. His stuff's very good. You actually listened, you watched that with me last night, and what was your take on it?
I like Antonio's takes in general. It's extremely well learned, smart, and I'm not as... It's one of the fun things about people who are far more specialized. He is very specialized. Is that a fair way to put it?
I would say that's a fair way to put it. I find him intimidating to have him on stream because I don't know a fraction of what he does in his domain.
He's very kind. He's kind of given me a little bit of shit for some of my takes, but he's kind, and he understands that I have not the ability to have the language that he does, and he's able to have that conversation in, I think, a very good faith way. So again, that's why I enjoy that stuff.
Yeah, the smart ones usually are like that, including present company. Again, thank you very much for joining me. I'll let you go now so you can sleep, or like, not.
I'm working.
You're working. Good God.
Well, never stops, my friend.
Ugh, this is working for me. All right, you have a good night. Thank you very much. Again,
enjoy it, of course.
Thanks everybody for sticking around for this. This was a task, but it was actually quite fun, I think. So tomorrow I'm going to be going into the EJ response to Vosh's critique. Vosh is a manipulative liar, I believe it's called. I will probably be doing that one by myself unless somebody else wants to drop in. But hopefully we'll do that tomorrow evening, and then on Thursday we'll be going over the EJ and Vosh debate concerning the same, and then we'll wash our hands of this forever, thank God. So have a good night, everybody. Thanks again to everybody who made interesting comments, and especially super chats, of course, and take care. Ciao.